Okay, we're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mahone Bay Town Council meeting. Members of council and staff are here as well. We'll be joined by some folks who are going to do a presentation for us. But before we do that, we're going to acknowledge that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent followed by the Living Peace and Friendship Treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. Members of council, this is called to order. We have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your wish with the agenda, please? Councillor Carver?
I move that we accept the agenda as distributed.
Thank you.
Accepted.
Councillor now seconds. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the first item of business. That's the minutes of the regular meeting that was held on the 12th of October. Councillor Feeney?
Where I move that we accept the minutes of the regular meeting of October 12th as submitted.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick?
Thank you, Mayor. I second.
Councillor Burdick seconds. You've heard the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. Then we'll go right to our presentation. And we have Samantha Vitalia with us this evening. And Samantha is with the Coastal Action Foundation, one of the many partners that the town of Mahone Bay is working with on a variety of projects. And Samantha is going to share with us some information about the Mahone Bay Living Shoreline project that they are involved in. Samantha, good evening and welcome. Nice to have you with us. I think you are going to take control of the screen.
Yeah, can everybody see the screen?
And you're off.
Great. Okay. So, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. My name is Sam Vitalia, and I am the climate change team lead at Coastal Action. And Coastal Action is a community-based environmental organization located here in Mahone Bay. And today I will be speaking with you about the Living Shoreline pilot project, specifically our project intentions and the activities we've completed to date, as well as our tentative installation schedule moving forward. So to start off, our pilot project is a 3-year project, and it's funded by the Intact Foundation. It was a highly competitive process, and we were one of only 5 projects selected throughout Canada in 2020 for their climate adaptation program. So as many of you know, the pilot project is building on the concept plan that was produced for the town of Mahone Bay in 2016 by CBCL as part of the Mahone Harbor Flood Prevention and Shoreline Enhancement Plan. And when developing this plan, I think it's important to note that CBCL conducted extensive site assessments and community consultations. And they did this before arriving at their final concepts. And to our knowledge, this plan had been shelved for around 5 years with a handful of attempts to receive funding. And currently this funded pilot project and the grant we received from the Intact Foundation has provided the first opportunity to see the concept plans through to implementation. The pilot project that is funded builds specifically on the Edgewater Street concept plan pictured here. So the Edgewater Street area, as many of you know, is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So that includes sea level rise, storm surge, increased precipitation, And these effects result in flooding, they result in coastal erosion, increase of contaminated stormwater runoff entering the harbor, various impacts like that. And then shown here is our project site. The pilot project focuses on the construction of only a 60-meter section of the entire Edgewater Street plan produced by CBCL, which is 700 meters in length. So we're focused only on a 60-meter section, and it's just located in front of the 3 churches that are shown here. This is a component of our educational sign, and it shows the 3 main components of the Living Shoreline project: the tidal wetland, rock sills, and vegetated bank. And these 3 components, I think it's important to note that they're going to address or help us adapt to some of the climate change effects that I'd mentioned earlier. And that these 3 components also work collaboratively to help dissipate wave energy, stabilize the bank, and filter stormwater runoff. This is just another close-up shot of the 3 components, highlighting them all. So just to talk a little bit more about the function of the system, as I mentioned, they work collaboratively. So the rock sills are going to help to dissipate wave energy during storms. So they're going to cause waves to break. The tidal wetland is also going to help buffer from wave impact, and it's going to help to filter any stormwater runoff. So it's going to eventually help improve water quality. And then the vegetated bank, the last component that's closest to the trail, is going to help stabilize that area of the shoreline. So a little bit about the projected impact of the project. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to help protect from flooding and erosion, but we also hope that it helps set precedent for other coastal communities, particularly those that are vulnerable to coastal climate change impacts like sea level rise and storm surge. It's also scalable. So like I mentioned, we're only doing a 60-meter site, but it's scalable along the whole 700 meters of Edgewater Street, where it was initially proposed by CBCL. And it's scalable in about 50 to 150 meter chunks. And our hopes and intentions with this project are that it helps the large scale projects, so the full 700 meters, gain some traction and potentially some funding. And of course, we're hoping that the project will help with behavior change and education, particularly around coastal climate change risks and coastal climate change adaptation in the town of Mahone Bay. Before getting into some of our progress to date, I think I'll speak a little bit about our project partners and the 3 primary activities that our project is composed of. So I've been mainly talking about the Living Shoreline system and the installation of that system, because one of our 3 main project activities is just constructing the Living Shoreline. But we also, in order to meet grant requirements, have a research component and a community engagement and education component. And in order to achieve all these different activities, we have many different project partners. Of course, the town of Mahone Bay, CBCL is helping us produce our final designs, and Transcoastal Adaptations, which is composed of both St. Mary's University and CB Wetlands and Environmental Specialists, will be helping with the tidal wetland install, and they will be conducting the research at the Living Shoreline site. So regarding our progress to date, I don't have any photos for these 2 points, but the engineers have produced preliminary design details, and we've acquired permits from the Navigable Waters Act and the Crown Lands Act. And pictured here are our partners at St. Mary's University. They have been collecting baseline data at the site throughout the summer. They flew drones over the project site and took footage that will help them map topography and vegetated cover. And they also installed and collected data from a wave gauge and a turbidity sensor pictured on the right-hand side of the slide. And those will help us better understand the amount of sediment that is present in the water after a storm, and also understand the height and frequency of waves. Pictured here are some of our community outreach that we've done so far. We've created both a project website and a project sign that's currently up by the trail with the help of Mahone Bay and I think an intern that was working for the town this summer. And this website and this educational sign are to help keep community informed about the project and also inform them about any opportunities that there might be to get involved. For example, we'll be hosting community planting days and demonstration site tours, ideally next year in the spring, when we're installing the tidal wetland component and the vegetated bank component. So we'll be updating these throughout the project to help keep the general public informed about what's going on and how they can get involved. So as I'm sure many of you already know, we conducted a geotechnical study this September. The barge there, pictured in the top two photos. And this study involved the drilling of 6 boreholes and the collection of marine soil samples. And so these samples are currently being analyzed, and what we're hoping they will help us understand is the weight-bearing capacity of the marine soils, and this will help inform the final designs, particularly that of the rock sills. So we're just trying to get a better understanding of our site before moving forward with installation. And the bottom 3 photos here are of some harvested plant stock that we've harvested and grown out with our partners at CB Wetlands. And these are various local rushes, grasses, and herbaceous perennials from various local tidal wetlands. And they are very hardy, they're locally adapted species, and they will be planted in the spring as part of the tidal wetland component of the living shoreline. We decided to harvest them ourselves versus gathering or ordering our plants through nurseries out of province or even out of country, because these species in particular, like I mentioned, are going to be locally adapted and will have a much easier time establishing themselves in the Mahone Bay Harbor. And a little bit about next steps. I just have a tentative timeline written down here because things have been changing quite rapidly, especially with COVID this year. So our tentative timeline right now, we're working on getting the geotech study results analyzed. So that's happening throughout October, and hopefully will be completed in the next week or so. In November, we'll be producing the final designs based on the geotechnical study results. In December and January, we're hoping to go through a procurement process to acquire a contractor. And this is to construct the hard infrastructure components of the living shoreline. So mainly the rock sills and some regrading for the vegetated bank area. And in May and June, we'll be installing what we call the soft infrastructure components of the living shoreline. So that's the tidal wetland and the vegetated bank. And those will, like I mentioned earlier, there'll be a community engagement component to that, and we'll host them. We'll host community planting days to help involve the general public in that process. So I hope that gives you an idea of what we've accomplished so far and what we're working towards. We're really very excited to be working with the town and to have helped fund the first phase of this project. And like I said earlier, our hopes and intentions are that this pilot project leads to a large scale project, and it helps that large scale project gain traction and funding.
Thank you, Samantha. Questions from council? Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. Such an interesting and exciting project. I'm wondering if people have been coming and stopping by to talk with you or ask you what's going on.
Occasionally, yes. Mainly through email, though. So But yeah, we do occasionally have people ask us about the project, and
What have been reaching out?
any questions to us if any concerned citizens talk to the town about the project. We're happy to answer their questions.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Samantha. As Councillor Carver just noted, it was an interesting presentation. And I think it's our lack of knowledge possibly that is resulting in the lack of questions. But I'm sure as the next 6-7 months unfolds and we get down to the plantings activity in June, that we will have seen how this project has developed and grown. And we do look forward to the final results that you will achieve. So thank you, Samantha.
Great. Thank you for having me, and feel free to reach out by email if you have any additional questions. I'm also happy to present again as our project activities and the installation is underway if there's any pressing questions.
Great, good to know.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to our item 4 on the list is correspondence. We had nothing for action items, but there are 4 things in the information item list. Some of them may require referral. I don't know. What is your wish with the information items?
Mayor, I move that we receive and file the correspondence.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Now? Okay, comments?
Yes, Your Worship, just one, and that is item 5.4. I assume that we would sort of automatically send that on to the planners.
Yes, I would agree. And I think the short-term rental concerns would go to the upland people for discussion at that committee meeting. Deputy Mayor?
I think Councillor Wilson, sorry.
Captured it?
It has captured what I wanted to say.
Okay,
I still come back to maybe we shouldn't have the 2 categories. They are confusing, they send the wrong impression sometimes. So I would say that just put correspondence there and we do it accordingly. Because if I was a citizen and we just received and filed, I'd probably not be very happy.
I don't disagree with that, but perhaps something that the idea should be referred to the policy committee for discussion. Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded.
Excuse me?
Yes, Councillor Carver?
Thank you. Well, I have 2 things now. One is that I think the issue of the correspondence and the 2 categories could be referred to the council policy. Could it go to the council policy discussion included in that? Thank you.
Yeah.
And then item 5.4, I certainly support the idea that it be referred to the planners, if not the planning advisory committee. And that a letter be sent to Chris and Katie stating that is how.
That's what we've done, and thank them for their comment.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I would agree with Councillor Carver on that, especially since there were 39 signatories to the letter, that just to make it very formal that it's been received and would be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could I do this, clerk? Normally, obviously, when we're doing thank you letters to things, we go by motion, but in this case, would this document that was submitted have been submitted to the planners as a matter of course? Would these people have been advised of that, or was it only going directly to council and as a motion necessary to refer it?
The discussion was about getting the letter to council. So So, yes, it's appropriate to send it to the planners because they are still in the process of working, of preparing that report, that first report that will go to the planning advisory committee. So yes, it would definitely be appropriate to have a motion to refer it to the planning staff directly.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. That is to receive and file with the addition that that particular letter from Chris and Katie would be referred to the planners, and that the letter from Tate McDonald would be referred to the land use bylaw review, the Plan Mahone Bay review that's going on. It would go to the Uplands people as part of that same motion. Okay, all right. You've heard the motion?
So go with the mover and seconder.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
They brought it up.
Fair enough.
Okay, all in favor? The motion is carried. Good, thank you.
So just
Deputy Mayor.
Just a little question. With the letter 5.4 being referred to the planners, does that automatically mean that it will be also shared with the PAC members, or does that need a special motion?
Now, my understanding is that any of the response that's going to the planners now would go into their report.
Package on
PAC.
the
Yeah,
PAC.
I believe that's the intention.
Okay, so they will see it, Deputy Mayor. All right, thank you. Now I have to find my agenda roll here. If you
Excuse me,
just give me-
Worship, may
Yes,
I
please.
I wanted to clarify, were we coming back to a motion that a letter be sent to Chris and Katie?
That
Was
got
that-
included as an amendment by the mover.
That
and
was one of the
seconder.
amendments. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I didn't confirm that in that second piece, I apologize for that, but that was part of the same action.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to part 6, staff reports to council. It is the end of the month. That's when all the big discussion takes place on it. You've got the report from staff. Does anyone have any questions or require any clarification?
Despite the length of the report, Mr. Mayor, I have to clarify, actually, it's not as long as it ought to be this month due to some formatting issues with the new quarter, the beginning of the new quarter on the strategic plan update report. It actually is not here, and it'll end up going into November 9th. So we'll get an extra report on the by. That's on my end. I just couldn't get it straightened out in time for the package deadline.
All right. Anyone else? Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I did have a question from the CAO's report, and that is just on point 1, where I noticed it mentioned that visitors to the office are permitted unmasked in the public area of the front office, and that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that what's meant to say is that we were prepared for when the province was, intending and repeating that they were going to remove masking restrictions in general, that we had prepared the front office with access controls such that we were ready to accommodate people who would be entering without a mask. But at this point, we haven't changed that. So we're prepared for that protocol. Now it looks like there's some question about how that is going to be rolled out, because it was going to be October 5th, masks off in those situations. And now they haven't set a new deadline for that with everything that's going on.
So it's status quo.
With status quo for now,
Okay.
and maybe I should go back and, yeah, we put that in to indicate we were prepared for that, and I had taken it out. And then they may still go that way, in which case that is the plan. If we get to a point where they remove the general indoor mask requirements. Yeah, or if we have a vaccine, proof of vaccine showing requirement that might enable people to remove the mask, but I don't know where we're going with that yet. It's later on tonight's agenda.
Councillor Kerr.
Yes, my question is about the entire other end of the report, the statistics. And I just wanted to understand the stats around water in number 7. And so where it says that the treated water is 15,000, whatever the quantity is. And then what's sold is 5,500. What's in that difference between the 15,000 and what? Is that why we're doing the leak study?
Those are the numbers from Q4. We look at the same numbers now for almost a year.
But it hasn't changed the question.
No,
You're still correct, that is the loss, that is the, yeah.
It is the loss. It's astonishing.
And I'm glad you asked actually, because we will have either council's next meeting or the one after that, the non-revenue water audit will be completed. People who got code red got a message today saying we'll be doing a stage of that, and then it got called off because of the wind. But as soon as that can be, that's the last detail. So we will have a report shortly. And to Councillor Wilson's point, this isn't very up to date, but I believe we'll also be changing the nature of the reporting, getting a little bit more detailed in that section after we have that report.
It's a very graphic portrayal of the loss.
Any other questions?
Very moved that we accept the staff report.
For information?
Information.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver seconds. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, CAO. Let's go back to the staff report on signage policy.
I keep thinking I have to unmute to say anything. As in general, we're presenting a report here. I'll certainly take questions, but this will just a little introduction because it has been some time. This was a direction of council in September of 2020 to look at amendment to policies that could reduce plastic signage during elections. And in particular, when we looked at our jurisdiction around the creation of a policy, this one focuses on what can be done to restrict signage on town property. Restriction of signage on private property is something that can be subject to the land use bylaw. So if council wants to look at restricting election signage on private property, that can be referred to the aforementioned steering team. That is absolutely something that can be within the jurisdiction of a land use bylaw. But as far as the signage policy, by policy, the town is able to regulate signage on our property. And we already have a past policy that essentially restricts signage on town property, but it wasn't applied outside of commercial signage traditionally. So election signage was seen as being permitted, and people would just generally look for high visibility corners and locations around town for their election signage. So the recommendation here is a policy which would close the door on that at council's discretion, and presented here, can make modifications from here at council's direction, or because policies are due to be considered at the meeting after the one at which they were introduced, the recommendation would be to adopt this policy at your meeting on November 9th. So if anyone has any questions, happy to take them.
Councillor
Jamie. Mayor, I'm pretty happy with this. I think this was well crafted. And if we all recall, like the origins of the story was really in the midst of the election season, municipal election across the province. There was some trends around political signage, specifically under the theme around plastic reduction, which has some altruistic benefits clearly, but at the same time also has a lot of people concerned about elimination of speech and in a political context. So I think this is an excellent compromise. It really addresses kind of the town's concern, doesn't really dip its toe into the water of telling individual citizens what they can and cannot have in the front lawn. So we always were worried in the original context about people saying you can't have an anti-oil drilling sign, you can't have an anti-salmon fishing sign or salmon farm sign. So I do think that the CAO and the staff has nailed this. this is a good way to move, and,
Mhm.
you know, I think we'll be talking about it more next month.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver?
Yes, I had a couple of questions. One was I'd like to understand the rationale for prohibiting off-premises advertising. Why is it a problem if I have a business and another property owner allows me to put an advertisement for my business on their property? Why is that not permitted? Or why is that thought to be a bad idea?
So it is obviously referenced in this because it is off-premises signage can be located on town property, but your example concerns off-premises signage on another commercial property. So that is regulated by the land use bylaw. As to why it's a bad idea, my guess would be, because it's already in our land use bylaw, would be that that's about clutter, general signage clutter. And, there have been some examples where a commercial property may find itself having a business of third-party signage based on having a nice location. You'll end up with a whole bunch of directional signage. Maybe the business isn't even functional. It's just a commercial piece of property that is well located and comes to play host to a lot of other signage. I don't know if there were any examples of problematic third-party commercial signage in Mahone Bay. So I don't know the history of it.
But it's in the land use bylaw and we could address that through our plan.
Yeah, this policy would only regulate the placement of it on town property. Yeah.
Your predecessor had a reputation for working on the weekends, taking signs down.
Well, I know his concern was also town property, I think.
It was in
predominantly, but-
contravention of the bylaws. Yeah.
So-
Councillor Carver,
Another
a supplemental,
If I may, thank you.
please.
So there's no election signs on town property and it's fine to have them on private property. But I just wanted to ask about the policy number, in the policy, number 5. And there seems to be an implication that only members of the Mahone Bay Tourism and Chamber of Commerce can be part of the effort to put up directional signage for businesses. I mean, that's laid out in quite detail, but number 5 seems to suggest that businesses that aren't members of the chamber couldn't be included in that. Maybe I'm reading things into it that aren't there, but.
What you're reading is the existing policy, and it does have a reference to the chamber. And that had to do with the concept of a uniform off-premises signage program, which, again, I wasn't here for, but I guess in 2004, the town and the chamber instituted. I don't know who brought it up. I don't know, but it was a co-venture. And there's one example that is cited in here that does currently exist, that is located at the corner of Edgewater and Clearland Road. So those are the signs that the chamber was involved in under the old policy. And essentially the new policy removes that program from the books because it hasn't been accessed in a long time. We're not recommending the continuation of it. So there will no longer be a role for the chamber with respect to signage under the new policy.
Well, I'm confused about the policy. What I'm looking at is something called off-premises uniform sign policy. And it said this policy ... replaces the former off-premises direction sign policy. So I assumed that this was a policy.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm sorry, that is a typo on my part. This one's from 2007. I missed up that. So this is still the previous policy. But in 2007, this previous policy replaced a previous policy from 2004. And that's my mistake dating to 2004 when I should have dated to 2007. I'm sorry. I didn't even notice that. But the new one also says it replaces all previous policies. So without putting a date on it, it would also replace that policy. And the only reference to the chamber in the new one is in the schedule where it references existing Chamber of Commerce signage, which is currently located on Main Street and Edgewater. And essentially what it's doing there is pre-existing that to the new policy. So if the chamber wanted to put up a third sign, you know which ones I'm talking about that they have their website. On the blockhouse approach on Main Street, for example, the town would expect to be asked and the council to grant permission under this policy. Because that's a non-commercial request from a local group, so that's still a possibility. And the same thing with the museum or the Lions.
Okay. Any further questions or discussion? You have a motion in the package.
Mary, sorry. Thank you.
Alice, Councillor Burdick, I apologize.
It seems like a reasonable idea, just to keep us in line with the, I'm not entirely sure about the reasoning about it keeping us in line with the environmental goals, especially since it'll still be happening on private property. But it does, like Councillor Petey mentioned, sounds like a reasonable compromise for now. It does raise a question about like the types of materials used in signs. I know that there were candidates in the previous election for modal, I think, who hand painted wooden signs and themselves and distributed them that way. But I don't know if that would be a mitigating factor at all. It sounds like a fairly total policy. But I'd be basically in agreement with it.
I think if the candidates are all good citizens and they'll dispose of their signs appropriately. I think one of the issues that we had discussed when the former councillor brought this issue up in Yarmouth area was signs were taken down and just strewn along the roadside. And they, being plastic, of course, they stayed there and stayed there and stayed there. I don't think Mahone Bay in particular has ever had a problem with candidates getting out within a day or two of the election and removing their signs. They are plastic and we can dispose of them. Okay, somebody like to make the motion?
Well, this one will just, I think, be carried over to the next agenda because of the requirement on the policy to stand for a meeting before it's adopted.
Okay,
This is just for information.
yeah, all right. I don't disagree with that.
We always have to do it that way. It's just been a little
Yeah, you're
while.
quite right, go for it, all right. That'll take us very quickly on to we'll move on to the transportation update.
So this is I'll just introduce this one as well. It's a big staff report. Obviously, we've got a lot of transportation stuff on the go, both in terms of council's infrastructure projects and then concerns that have been raised by residents and directions from council. So trying to unite it all under one roof to give people a picture of everything that's going on. Certainly there is a little bit more depth that can be provided on some of these items. It's always hard to find the right level of detail. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to go into them. As far as the recommendations, recommendations here essentially suppose that we are waiting on funding to implement infrastructure upgrades that we've been directed to do, as the funding applications are noted there. But although these recommendations speak to next steps thereafter, we also certainly can take council's direction on the specific implementation of traffic calming measures that might be able to be implemented in the immediate term or other infrastructure projects. So happy to take any questions, or we have 3 motions that could be moved individually or separately.
Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I mean, fantastic report, CAO, and just kind of goes to show how the agenda is evolving. On the recommendations, I guess where my head is I'd rather have us focus in the short term, which is means between now and budget deliberations, on specific actionable items associated with traffic calming and or items that were reviewed and already approved by council in the 2020 transportation plan. And I'm a little confused by the recommendation to enter into another round of third-party consultants engaging on further studies specifically to the Main Street Edgewater corridor. And the document alludes to the original CBCL report that was well reviewed and litigated by council. And for the most part, what constituted the 2020 plan was what council and the community was comfortable with. i.e., what was not included in the 2020 plan was reviewed, discussed, debated, and shelved. So I think where council was at the time, and I bet where council is now, is we're pretty comfortable with what's in the 2020 plan as denoted in the tear sheet. What we weren't comfortable with regard to the CBCL plan was a whole variety of recommendations, including things like, paving the park, turning it into a parking lot, tearing down the cenotaph and moving it to the other side of town, putting in a traffic circle, and a number of other items that caused the community quite a bit of concern. So we're very, very pleased with the progress made to date. And I'm completely supportive of every element of the 2020 plan that we have denoted here, including moving forward with the traffic calming measures that the deputy mayor's been promoting in the last few meetings, and we've been trying to move that along through the staff agenda. What I'm not excited about is supporting a further $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 study to talk about the redesign of the Main Street Edgewater intersection. And if that's what is being requested, then let's just specifically let's not make it confusing and place that in the context of a 2,000, 3,000 word document. Let's just specifically talk about that and debate the merits of that, if that's where people's heads are. So I would rather, cutting to the chase, I'd rather have us focus on kind of moving forward with the traffic calming on Claremont Street and Kinburn Street, the rest of the sidewalks that we've already approved, and the other items that are already in the plan. Let's just proceed.
The crosswalks that we've already approved.
Everything on the list from 2020 that everyone has already looked at and reviewed. But as far as engaging CBCL on another study, I'm like I would prefer to defer that to the budget deliberation so we can have a more all-inclusive conversation about the merits.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Feeney. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Sorry.
It's time we actually poured some concrete and did some physical things that people can see that give us tangible results. This is another, a bunch of money that would be spent that would not come to fruition in the foreseeable future in anything concrete that I can see. So I agree. Let's put in the crosswalks. Let's do the things we know we need to do.
Okay. CAO and then the mayor.
So just a two-part response. The fact that there's no motion on getting on with the things that have been directed is that is happening. So, looking at these as kind of some of the next steps. I think, Joe, you're mostly speaking to the first one around the intersections. So I'll just speak to that first. I guess as to be frank, because you want us to be frank, and we'll have this discussion, everybody can see what we're really talking about. As a traffic authority, I am still kept up at night by CBCL's concerns with regards to Edgewater and Main. Nothing to do with the cenotaph. The yield lane there, we were told that yield lane is problematic. It goes against the best practices of Transportation Association Canada. And I still feel that is a problem that we need to resolve. The suggestion of moving the memorial was essentially made because it was being made in a document that was high level without sufficient study of the intersection to potentially recommend safe alternatives. But if we want to have a real analysis of what can be done to bring that intersection into line with national guidelines around safe intersections and deal with that yield lane, we do need to have engineering expertise. The simple thing to do would be we just tee it where it currently does. So you drive past the monument and then you would make a left turn, not easy, but you'd lose the yield cut if you're coming from this direction. So I don't think that generally people would like to just lose that yield lane completely, but that is a solution. Without engineers, I can tell you that that would be okay. So that's where that's coming from. As far as Long Hill Road, it's been raised that the crossing that exists, obviously, that is on council's list, that we wanted to replace the trail crossing. Due to the positioning on the corner, we would have to go to quite some length to have a push button crossing at that intersection. Alternatively, a study of the intersection, could allow us to look at reconfiguration with a large, because you see how large Long Hill Road is when it comes down. There may be an option there that would reposition the crossing to get a better line of sight. But at the same time, council has directed us to take action on the crossing. So, the frank part of that is it's very difficult to take action on the crossing as it currently stands. Without an engineer, the only option that I can really offer there would be, it works, is a push button crossing where the lights are going to be offset around the corner so that in both directions people can see that there is a stop that they're about to have to make. So I think it would be valuable to get additional input on those two pieces, but at the same time, and it's not going to go to CBCL, we just go to tender, so we'll see what we get. But at the same time, we have ways to move forward on them. It's just we don't have an in-house engineer, so those ways may not be the best ways. But I do, I take your point that we don't want to slow down the implementation of agreed to infrastructure improvements, and that's not the intention there. And I don't know if you were speaking to the next one where it says south of Claremont Street. That does call back to the notion that there were other things that were discussed when we agreed to that project. And my recollection of it is that we concentrated them geographically in the part of town that is to the north side of Claremont Street. If you look at everything we approved, it is. And there were suggestions, three-way stop at Pleasanton, Maine, Fairmont Street becoming a one-way street, a couple of crosswalk locations in that lower section of Main Street that, I understood council to have parked for further consideration. But I could be wrong. Maybe they were just fully out of line, So those are my thinking there, trying to connect some of the dots around those. But of course, it's all at council's discretion. As traffic authority, I just want to make sure council's conscious of some of the ongoing issues.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you for all the contributions. I was wondering if might be helpful for us to consider, maybe talk about the ones we have general agreement about. That sort of seems we are all on the same page that we should and go forward with, and sort of, I guess, walk them out of the system, so to speak. And then I do agree that those two places you mentioned, the intersection at Main and Long Hill, also need consideration. And maybe those can be the next one to talk about. The south side of Claremont, I think maybe if we put that tonight, I think we'll spend the whole night here, I guess, looking at those. So my suggestion would be, I think that the ones that we've agreed upon and sort of are supposed to go ahead, maybe discuss or figure out when they're happening. So one of the confusing things for me was I didn't clue in that we are waiting for funding so that we can do, for instance, the crosswalk at Kelly Bridge. I thought that's going to be done. I think there was some issue around.
This is where I said, it's a question how far we want to get into each of these on that, but
yeah.
I'll run down the list of the crossings. So funding obviously is great if we get it, and we have applied for funding, but we're not dependent on funding. It's just, we see opportunities, we're going to try to see what lines up. One of the things around the crossings is that we have at the county level recently adopted accessibility plan. And there was an intention to get from the province some clear guidance around built environment accessibility standards. It's our understanding that will have an impact on the design of some of these crossings, in particular where there's a crossing that doesn't cross to another sidewalk or like a piece of town infrastructure. So some of them, the Cherry Lane crossing, the medical center crossing, and the Lutheran Church crossing, those are really only one step away in terms of understanding the requirement when they get across the street in terms of what infrastructure they need to connect to in order to meet those standards. I confess that we really did think we would get to those by now. I think with Jonathan here, with Ellen over in Chester as our shared accessibility coordinator, we're certainly confident that we'll have that standard very soon. If we don't get the funding, it won't stop us from being able to move ahead. Now, obviously, weather-wise, there's concrete work in all the cases, so that's going to present a challenge. As far as Keddies, this is a project that is inherently a co-project with a private property owner, and he's very interested. No issue there. The property owner is interested, but you can't have a crossing that goes into the parking lot that just goes out into a parking lot where cars can drive across it. There's no access control. It could create a real safety hazard. Right now, people cross without a crossing. There's less liability than if we build a crossing and the crossing isn't safe. And so the property owner's been very agreeable to the notion of building a berm, a curbed area along the roadside. Of course, that comes with stormwater management considerations. So right now, it's a low-lying area. The water gets up on and it doesn't drain very well. If there's an addition of a curb or berm there, the water will pool there. So what we've done at the staff level is we have a culvert that runs across the street just up a ways a little bit. And we've designed a catch basin location where we can put in a new catch basin and the pipe can be diverted over to that culvert. And that should pick up the water that would sit. The intention is to put in that catch basin in coordination with the private property owner putting in his roadside development there for traffic control. My understanding is Jonathan has been on standby with the property owner now for a couple of months. Everybody's busy. I'm not, but we're prepared to undertake that work in coordination with the property owner. At the same time, as was noted at another recent meeting, TAB, I guess, Jonathan has been working with TIR to look at pushing that 50 zone back up the hill. And we're expecting very shortly the installation of a new permanent speed sign at the bridge. So, all of that coordinates with the development of the crossing. But the crossing is something that we would love to have had in this fall. I mean, there's no waiting for funding. If funding comes along in the winter while we're trying to, make things work, that's great. That would be the intention is that would be a push button rectangular rapid flashing beacon sign. So it's, there is some cost. It's probably a $15,000 job, all things considered. So it wouldn't be bad to have external funding. Town hall is even, quite complicated as well, because at the current time, access controls to our parking lot, the location of the median here, there's no place that the crosswalk can come across and not be in a challenging access situation. People love to loop around in our parking lot here. UCL made some recommendations around the reconfiguration of the parking area. We've essentially been waiting to have a discussion about parking at the town hall as a contingent of discussing whether there would be some change to the garage out back. So we have a suggestion for how we might change the access control and median and parking spaces here in a way that would facilitate pedestrian access in a safe way. But that is, I think it's going to need to be discussed in the context of the availability of parking. Because right now, we have very limited public parking for the town hall. And it is also valued by the businesses across the street who have very limited public parking.
So how many of the actions in this report could we go and start Monday morning if we had a can of paint and a brush and right?
Yeah, with a can of paint and a brush.
Are done.
Yeah, with a can of paint and a brush, not any of them. Could we order signage associated with some of the traffic calming recommendations and get that put up? We absolutely could do that. Could we actually, still have time this winter to work on the Keddies intersection? I think we do have time. It would just, there's a closing window of time.
So the crossing at Cherry Lane, the medical center crossing on Main Street, Lutheran Church crossing, those are all not doable at this point?
I don't know that we will get to them before winter, looking at the schedule that we've got. As you know, there was some turnover in public works this year.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that we will get to them before winter. I think the Lutheran Church crossing we were hopeful for being able to do. There's some curb alterations that would need to happen there as well. But at the same time, we now know that we need to restore some conduit under the street there on Edgewater. So that's having to do with lighting the crossing, because we had the intention to replace 2 of the light standards there. There's been an intention that when we did that, we would upgrade. So this is why everything is so complicated. We would upgrade the electrical supplies. So talking with our electrical department, they kind of got the scoping a little bit more. We would need to run some new conduit in order for that to work. So that means digging up Edgewater Street to run some conduit. When we looked at realistically what we could get to, the electrical staff are working on upgrading power for the nursing home over the next number of weeks. And it's unlikely that we would be doing that work at this time of year. So I'm very apologetic. I know that now that we have a new manager of transportation, he's very enthused to get these things off his plate. They've been there and he wants to get them done. So I have no fear that he will be excited to hit the ground running as soon as possible. But you know, everything is complicated. So I guess it's, you know, council understand where we're coming from. You know, feel free to tell us that you see a different way forward with some of these things.
So essentially the 2020 plan is the 2020 to 2022 plan, realistically. And the for example, like the complexity of the sidewalk across the street from the town hall means we have to replace the little boulevard, we have to move the grinding stone, and put in new concrete, and it's more than meets the eye either, because we all know we can paint a sidewalk, because we did that last summer across from the between Bill store and the grocery store. Fair enough. So beyond that, there's a number of other recommendations from CDCL in the original document that I think you categorized as south of Claremont, including things like the 3-way stop at the end of Fogo Road, for example, as one of the many ideas. Those never made the original cut, predominantly not due to council objection. It was really due to funding. We wanted to break things up in kind of $100,000 increments. And so we said, okay, what can we do for $100,000? And that's where the original budget kind of came from. But now as we're moving through whatever funding we're going to need, maybe we need more than 100,000 to get this list done, considering we've done some things already. Fair enough. And then beyond the things that we'll all agree upon that are just the reasonable phase 2, phase 3, then you have kind of more contentious structural items that are, you know, driven by engineering and traffic studies and experts in the field. For example, Edgewater and Main Street redesign. So, like, I'm open-minded and reasonable. What I'm trying to be respectful of is that not everyone in the community agrees with everything in the original CDCL plan. And then if we're going to proceed with a recommendation tonight to march firmly on into engineering designs, we have to understand that when the engineering designs come back to us, they're coming back to us from nameless, faceless engineers who may not necessarily be cognizant of the community sensitivities. So again, I think I have every faith that council makes the right decisions. And I think it's most likely that a decision made tonight would be the right one. All I'm suggesting is that let's just be a little cautious of knowing exactly what we're asking for, with the expectation that we don't know what we're going to get back and how the community would feel about that. The other item, and then I'll wrap up, is a lot of the context for the plan around Long Hill Road to the Blockhouse, the Blockhouse town boundary was really this was pre seniors complex, and we at that time we thought we were going to do our number one capital project was a major water sewer upgrade from Long Hill Road to the boundaries of the Blockhouse boundary, which obviously would impact anything we do around that corner. And I mean, hope springs eternal. Inevitably, that number one town priority gets done, but we've been waiting for 5 years and it hasn't happened yet. So I know we don't want to wait forever, but in my mind, if we actually did have any line of sight to getting funding to do the sewer and water upgrade, that would be the obvious time we would do the the road across. But again, we don't want to wait forever. So anyway, those I think you all know where I'm coming from on this. No surprise here.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just one final slap at this thing from me. I hear you, Don, about the complexities of crosswalks and so on, and I understand that. So what my question is, I guess, is there are some things I think that are in here that we could do without a lot of complexity. I'm thinking about the speed humps and speed cushions and such that have been designated for, I think, Claremont Street and maybe some others. And given the current climate, and given all the complaints we've had in the last 3 or 4 months, that might be a good idea to do some of that if it's possible.
Traffic quieting. Yeah. Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Carver.
Thank you. Yes, that was what I had written down too, was really about if there was a way to deal with the traffic calming in a really physical way. It keeps coming up. I mean, all of these things keep coming up, but that would actively slow down traffic in a large part of the town. So until some of those other projects can be figured out, a crosswalk sounds like a simple thing, but it's not. But then once it's explained, it's like, well, there's all of these other factors.
$7,000 for crosswalks.
Yes, and also the fact that there's a sidewalk on one side
Oh, yeah.
and not on the other. That seems like, if that is a feasible thing, that seems really reasonable. And I personally would favor speed bumps or cushions to the proposed possible painted bike paths, especially because it would affect parking, which is also another issue in town.
Councillor Carver.
Yeah, I have a different feeling about implementing traffic calming measures on Claremont at this point, with the specter of the development of 66 Claremont, and that the traffic pattern, the traffic is going to change certainly during construction. I just can't quite see how they go together. And I agree with Councillor Burdick that I didn't like the idea of the alternative parking idea or driving idea. It's I think it would be great, but not in this situation. And because of the loss of parking, I would be concerned about that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, will you CAO?
So I just wanted to call everyone's attention to the final page. I guess I could do a screen share. Seems weird. I could do a screen share if you prefer, but the final page of that report is the map of the proposed traffic calming. So it might get lost in it's a very
final.
Yeah, it's page 42 of 42. So it might get lost in the length of the package there. So this one is the essentially Bicycle Nova Scotia recommended the advisory bike lanes and the possible reduction in speed limit, and then CBCL came in later and said that they didn't recommend that. And so the way that it's phrased in the report is that if council desires, we would have to actually reach out to the province to implement either the advisory bike lanes or reduce speed limits. We don't have the discretion to do either without the province's support. So these measures, the possible signage, possible speed humps or cushions, possible raised pedestrian crossing, are other things that we could do that follow CBCL's recommendations that could be done like any time at our own discretion and under our own authority. And then the other two things are things that if we wanted to, we could also do, but probably are not necessary in combination. I think CBCL's general point was implement some or all of these recommendations and then study the effect on average speed with our speed counters and see if we're starting to get down to 30. The suggested speed for a street that we would describe as a safe cycle street is below 30, so that the prevailing speed below 30. That doesn't mean the speed limit needs to be below 30. That just means that due to whatever conditions exist, the typical average speed is going to be below 30. So I think the thought is try these things, do some speed counting, see what effect that has. And in the meantime, council discretion, we could reach out and require or request of the province consideration to reduce the speed limit and or look at those advisory bike lanes. But these things, and it's essentially saying that bicycle route signage, so people will see signage that says bicycle route, that might be something that helps them to be more aware and to slow down. Obviously, speed humps or speed cushions will also help people to be aware and slow down because they're going to hit them. So those are some suggested locations based on the street. And then the raised pedestrian crossing, clearly that's if there's going to be a development, but it could be done as a speed hump that could then have the potential, if we make it wide enough, to just anticipate becoming a raised pedestrian crossing. So they you don't have to hold off, just don't paint a crossing if it goes to a derelict property, which is currently all that's there.
Okay.
So these are the ones that we're looking for direction on if council wants to do something right away. And the Connect 2 application is for the implementation of these, but they're not hugely expensive. So, if we don't get it, we can focus that application on trying to achieve a corridor through to Main Street or whatever. So.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Now, and then Councillor Feeney.
Thanks, that the map helps partially the question I was about to ask, but I was curious where the speed humps would be.
And they could be anywhere. But
Yeah, so surprised that there's none on Claremont Street, as in, I understand the raised pedestrian crossing is there, but maybe a couple there would also, because I think that stretch is one of the ones that folks have complained about. And in many ways, because the playground is there, we want to reduce speed there even much more. So
I think the reason that CDCL recommended them predominantly on Kinburn was just thinking about where people are coming into this section from, that they would be driving quickly. So in the Claremont stretch, I guess, you have people who have come up from past Pond Street. Obviously, there's so much parking and congestion around that area that it's not, would be after that. Maybe they start into a straight rip up the street kind of thing. That raised crossing that was proposed there would be a bit of an interception.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be another one up the hill. So it's, are we worried about people accelerating the hill? I think their concern was people coming on to Kinburn on their way into town. And especially now with the Main Street, that those people are speeding. And by the time they've hit 4 speed bumps, then they're on Claremont, they're probably already starting to watch their speed. So I think that was the thought, but upper Claremont, across from the entrance to the ball field, or a little bit further up towards the corner, you wouldn't want it right on the corner. That might be a possibility.
and the other question I was curious about is, so in other places have been just to calm traffic, you have sort of like bands of sort of intrusions into the road that are built up, and maybe it's like maybe it might be a tree that's planted, and then there's a whereby you're forced to almost go into a one lane to a certain extent, so you have to slow down when you get there. And I was wondering, are those things not allowed in Canada?
No, I think it's called a chicane.
Well, that's one of the names for it. They've got them in Halifax.
Yeah, it depends on the area. I think the kind where the curb comes out are probably in a stretch like Kinburn would be quite strange because there is no curbing or anything, obviously.
Yeah.
The kind where there's just like a tree in the middle of the road that you have to avoid, it actually would work very well in this section. I just think that it was seen as less conventional by the engineers, but it's something that goes according to Transportation Association of Canada guidelines. It is a good thing to do. In Shelburne, I always draw on Shelburne examples, but there's a historic well located right in the middle of a road. It's bright red, you couldn't miss it, you wouldn't run into it, but it definitely requires people to navigate around it and makes the, so that type of the traffic calming measure is certainly on the table. Maybe on Claremont, just after you come up from Pond, a big tree right in the middle of the street would help. So those are options.
Well, it doesn't have to be right in the middle, but so my hidden agenda in many ways in all of this has been to think about Mahone Bay as a very walkable and I guess pedestrian friendly town, and if whatever we can do to get us there, I think would be very, very helpful. This might be a very good opportunity to do that, so that in many ways, whoever's trying to run away from what we've done on Main Street just finds themselves slowed down there much more than they would, and it will reduce traffic there to a certain extent.
Councillor Now.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor just raised a pretty interesting point. I never thought about the berms, but that would probably work quite well in that area. We had the road narrowed down in some areas. I was thinking about the speed bumps, but they have to be so that we remove them in the wintertime because of plowing. And the same thing with the raised sidewalk, raised crosswalk. I'm not sure how those would work. But I'm wondering if the cutting into the pavement would work, rumble strips would work almost as well if we had several of them on the street. So that, when you see a lot of places have it so far ahead of a stoplight or a stop sign, you have the rumble strip. So I'm wondering if that would maybe work almost as well as the speed bumps, but you wouldn't have to worry about them for the winter time.
Do you want me to?
Please, yes. Go ahead.
So I think, it all depends if you ask, obviously, in snow maintenance, how difficult bumps and humps and cushions are for snow maintenance. If they're well designed and there isn't like a very immediate hump to it, like it isn't impossible to have them be there through the winter. We're not recommending a removable kind. They do exist, they absolutely do exist. They are challenging in terms of wear and tear, and they, look wise, they certainly do look temporary. So we think that we can accommodate the winter maintenance around the humps or cushions. As far as the rumble strips, we did put some down in Shelburne, and I have looked at these quite a bit. Winter maintenance wise, they're actually quite challenging. Because they, get filled in, and you try to get the blade down, you start chopping them up. It doesn't take much to hook the blade into those. It's also the case that when you slow down for a speed bump, and you guys, I'm sure you've gone into Yarmouth on the 103, there are other places where you encounter those lines. It's difficult to make the experience at a low speed as good as the experience of going over a speed bump. Like they're always an impediment. They're an impediment even at an appropriate speed. So I think we would actually arguably get more complaints about the overuse of those rumble strips than we would about, but I mean, it's absolutely an option. We absolutely could do it. Our regular contractors who do pavement work, they all have the capacity to do that generally. So
just one more comment. I was just thinking about the speed limit. The yard being the 50-kilometer speed limit. Lowering to 30, I don't think is really gonna slow them down all that much. If they want to speed, they're gonna speed. And the only thing that would give us is that we have to really big down on the enforcement. That's the only way that lowering the speed limit is going to help lower the speed.
Okay, Councillor Feeney and then Councillor Burke.
Mayor, I'll just be brief. I've long supported a move from 50 to 35 on Claremont Street, Kinburn Street, Main Street, Bobo Road. Anywhere there's a street, feel free to move it to 35. I just don't know from the document how hard that is and if there are any downsides to doing that. Like if there's any unintended consequences of doing that. But if there was ever a recommendation from the traffic authority or CBCL or community group to formalize a move to lower speed limits, they've got a vote here. And then finally, if we had a public meeting regarding development on Claremont Street, there was quite a few comments from the community around a desire for traffic calming. This has come up a couple times. I think there was a motion or at least a note from the deputy mayor maybe 2 months ago on the topic that made that formed part of this document. So is this a formal recommendation on page 42 to proceed with these speed humps, or is this a more of a theoretical to be studied plan, CAO?
So because we had applied for Connect 2 funding recently, and that was Catherine's report in September around the bicycle route, and the notion around the bicycle route is that whatever we're doing here could get the speed limit below 30, so that in combination with the low traffic volumes, we could say Kidburn and Claremont are the safe cycling route for people who want a safe cycling route to get from the school to residential neighborhoods, downtown, et cetera. The pool, the tennis court, other recreational things that younger people, everybody's trying to get to. So that's the connection in terms of Catherine had made that recommendation, and council passed the motion to apply to Connect 2. So that application does include the notion that we would go out to the community and say, here's the traffic calming solution or solutions, pick one and implement it with significant cost sharing from the Department of Energy. So I didn't recommend here that we just do one of these things right now, but only so that that could still take place over the winter months with this happening in the spring. Asphalt's happening for another couple of weeks. We have our usual last call asphalt work that takes place is taking place in 2 weeks' time. So possibly at that time, we could add some of this work and could do it, but I just didn't include it in there for that reason. So if council's inclined to just jump on it in terms of a couple of speed bumps or something, or signage, you know, that is still actionable at this time. That's why it's not there will be a recommendation if you wait, but there's no reason that this is the recommended approach if you were to take an approach versus other types of traffic calming that we discussed. Although those are all valid, and if we want to look at them further over the winter months, you know, it's just a matter of, you know, CPCL says speed bumps. I like the speed cushions personally because they're designed so that emergency vehicles with a larger wheelbase can navigate through them at a higher speed since they know where they're located, and that's really kind of what they're for. But obviously, speed humps are the most conventional. People certainly understand them and understand the slowdown. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Councillor Burry, and then Councillor Wilson.
I would make that motion that we implement speed bumps or cushions upon, upon our agreement, so that we get that started. I love the idea of the shaping of land because it encourages pedestrian use also. But I feel maybe at this time, cost-wise, it might not be as good. I'm not knowing the cost exactly of those two things.
So if I could comment on that. So if we did some speed humps or speed cushions with just our current own budget paving, and then we did get the Connect 2 money, that would still present an opportunity to do more investigation of the chicane or curb of push outs that could still be used, depending on council's preference.
And I think that would be a discussion for council when we found out that we're going to get that money that was.
Which we may not. I know last year we waited, and I don't want everybody to wait. Just
I'm still waiting for street pipe money. Councillor Feeney is it? No, I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you, Councillor Burdick. I'm not sure that quite rose to the level of emotion because you didn't get a seconder. So, okay. And I have some.
I'll let you want to say.
But I have some wording here. I can do that. Sure. Move the council. Especially, I'm going to suggest that we defer the 3 proposed motions for a later date.
Okay.
Perhaps even as far as budget time. So we can have a proper conversation about the pros and cons of moving cenotaphs and such like. But I would like to move that with Councillor Burdick's permission that council instructs staff to install 2 traffic calming devices, speed humps or cushions at appropriate locations on Claremont and Kinburn streets.
Only 2?
3.
It's just a test, right? We're just testing.
Oh, okay, 3. Yeah, that'd be like Claremont, Kinburn, and 1 in the middle.
I amend my motion to 3.
There you go.
I'll second that motion.
You'll second his motion on your motion.
I'm not sure who's.
That's motion squared, second.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Carver on the question.
Yes, Mr. Mike, could you explain more about the cushion and your comments about emergency vehicles having a wide wheelbase and they know where these are so they can avoid them? I'm wondering then if some of the big super trucks might also have a wide wheelbase and figure out where they are.
Yeah, the difference is really just, do you have one raised section of pavement that goes all the way across the street from one side to the other, or do you have them positioned such that they are intended to be unavoidable to your average vehicle, your average private vehicle, but allow a cut between, so you have one in each lane and a cut in between them, and some larger vehicles can position themselves to avoid hitting them, essentially, is the thought. Versus having just one that goes right across that can't be avoided.
So emergency vehicles figured could go that, and other large vehicles could also figure it out.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that is part of the issue is, obviously they're more effective on a sedan or an SUV or, smaller vehicles, but.
So in my mind, that would be an argument for the speed bumps rather than the cushions, but. Yeah.
And that's really just, I mean, the discussion around the table here. I'm happy to describe to the department, either you have to worry about it or you can kind of,
Okay, Deputy Mayor?
So I think we should just agree that we want speed bumps and set speed bumps we want and make that clear for you.
Well, we're still in discussion on the motion, so you should say that
Yeah.
to Kelly.
So rather than say ADAS, just say speed bump.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we got their support.
Friendly amendment to speed bumps. Okay.
Or humps.
Yeah, they are humps. That's just what they're called. Transport Association.
Some places they call sleeping policemen.
So we have a motion moved and seconded that direct staff to install speed bumps, at least three speed bumps on the Kinburn, Claremont strip of roadway.
And just while we're still in discussion, would one of those three locations, the one on Claremont, would we want to go with the location that could potentially become a crosswalk, or do we? Because I mean, I think if we were picking one on Claremont.
Give us an idea of what it's going to do.
Yeah, it's right in front of the playground.
Somewhere in the playground.
Okay. So on the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Do we need a motion to defer the three issues that are in the text of the article?
Yeah, it won't come up, this report won't come up again if we don't have some, but Councillor Carver may wish to use the council.
Well, I'm interested in taking some action on the third suggested motion. And because I am interested in the idea of implementing speed limits in the town below 50 kilometers. So I would make a motion that I'm going to make it. The council directs staff to reach out to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to evaluate the potential for speed reduction below 50 kilometers an hour.
I was gonna second motion.
As was I.
And just to note, the way I wrote this wasn't about any specific area, we were just gonna see the conversation and.
Okay, I think Councillor Feen's hand was up a split second before Councillor Burdick, so you get the second right.
Fair enough.
Okay,
And note that I did not include the advisory.
Yes.
session.
yes, yeah. So we've got a motion on the floor on the question. Deputy Mayor?
So from my understanding is that right now, from our legislative part of things, is that we are not allowed to do that.
So we're allowed to request it of the
Right.
province, they would have to give us permission.
Yeah, and there is a private opposition members bill, I guess, being tabled to sort of allow municipalities to be able to do that. And so I'm wondering, for me, I think that probably is the advocacy we might need to be doing, because I guess the staff within these departments would not have the ability, might be restrained, I guess, from giving us the ability to be able to do that, because there is no legislative authority to allow us to do that. So I guess for citizens, I think it's important that they talk to their MLA or representatives, sort of say the importance of us as towns being able to do this kind of stuff. What I'm wondering is, for us, what mechanisms do we have other than reaching to, I guess, public stuff, to be able to maybe say this is something that's important? Can we, as council, write a letter in support of such a motion? Or would that be considered out of order?
Yeah, I mean, council could write to our MLA or the Minister of Transportation. No, I mean, that's certainly not unreasonable. But we do have, I just want to make it clear, we do have recourse to the Provincial Traffic Authority to request a reduction in speed currently.
Okay.
But it's a process that, as you say, does essentially let the province say yay or nay at their own discretion at the staff level. And typically they have required to see traffic calming measures that have been put in place and the effect of those measures. So they might likely come back to us and say, what have you done? And we'll say, well, we're putting in 3 speed humps. And they'll say, well, let them be in there for a while and see how that works, kind of thing. So, you know, that's the typical experience. So what you're talking about could happen in parallel to that, or, you know, but I'd say it would be a motion to write to.
And this, what I'm saying, that based on the experience that we've had an item on your report, CAO, around asking for the reduction of speed from the highways, I think for the last, since I've been in council, right? So meaning that there's obviously something that's preventing them from actually getting back to us on speed reduction. Yeah, so if council is open to that, I think we should write a letter to our local representative and even to the minister to say we're supporting it.
Well, I can see that having some traction to get some action on the town speed, not on the highway speed limit coming into town. They got a different attitude about that. Councillor Feeney and then Councillor.
So, you know, I'm fully behind the deputy mayor's, you know, spiritually. I just think procedurally we need to figure out what the best avenue to secure that advocacy is. So it's been our standard process to not provide ratifying support for any other levels of government's private members' bills, regardless of how appropriate or how much we personally support them. But we do have the ability, we do have a union that supports our view that is what their job is for. Like that's why they have an executive director, and that's why they have a full-time staff, and that's why we are a member of the 53-member municipal union of municipalities. So I'm all for pushing the envelope as indicated by the deputy mayor, but I just want to be kind of intellectually consistent with our previous discussions around support for third-party private members' bills, regardless of how personally I agree with them. So if we did receive a letter from an MLA who said that they have a private members' bill and we're looking for support for that private members' bill, which we've dealt with twice in the last 4 months, in both of those situations, we thought our standard protocol was to say, we can't really respond for all of the obvious reasons. So I'm all for figuring out who our friends are and even inviting them to come to town council, make a little presentation to us about what the objective is. And then obviously to use that information that comes from the delegation to influence a response. But I think we just have to be open, we have to have some level of consistency around the policy about how we do that. So if we found out who the member was who was crafting the private members bill, or someone like Minister MP Julian, for example, I think our where we ended up was our protocol would be to invite them to council so that they could speak to the item, and council would be able to ask some questions, and then we would be able to, from there, forward that information and the response and whatever the package was to the MLA or the MP. So, like, I'm all for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy to have have a beer with whoever the MLA is and give them a pat on the back and say, we're behind you 100%. I'm just thinking from a protocol perspective, we just have to be consistent.
I agree. Councillor Carver?
There's a motion on the floor, and this discussion is kind of sideways from that motion. And if anybody in the room would like to make a motion on that topic after this motion is concluded, that would be
All right.
great.
Clerk, would you read us the motion, please?
The council directs staff to reach out to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to evaluate the potential for speed reduction below 50 kilometers an hour.
Thank you. Moved in second. So, on the motion, all in favor? Motion's carried. We'll write the letter. Deputy Mayor, did you want to make a?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that I hear what you're saying. I think you know I disagree in principle with that approach. I think what you just said primarily outlines why I have a problem with that approach. But in this particular case, if we're not writing a letter, inviting them to come and tell us about something that they're trying to do for municipality, we already know what they're trying to do, so we don't need to invite them to come here. How do we support, or how do we show that that is something that we as a council and as a town need? From my perspective, the best thing to do is either write a letter or say that at council and have that minted. Yeah, so I don't think I'll put a motion on, but
Okay.
I think we've seen how problematic we've tied our hands basically there with something done in the past.
There's always the question of whether it's easier to get permission than it is to get forgiveness.
Once that comes forward, once that bill comes forward, can we not show our support to the union notes with the municipalities for them to take forward?
I would expect that UNSM would come out and ask the municipalities for a statement of
So
support.
say we can show our support to them, and then that way would go.
It seems to be getting a lot of traction with UNSM, that notion of the 30 kilometer speed limit. Councillor Carver, you had a comment?
Yes, I would like to ask the CAO if it would make any sense, picking up on the deputy mayor's ideas, just for council to write a letter to our new MLA. And just saying that we are asking for this allowance, and just for her information. Is there any mileage in doing that? It's a way of introducing ourselves to the MLA, letting her know that we're asking the province for some help with something. Or is that just a fool's errand?
I don't know. I don't think so. Councillor Burdick?
I was gonna say that I like that as an approach in general, and maybe it's a way to sort of navigate this question, is that we're communicating to our MLA, who should be responsive directly to us in that matter, just say, this is sort of like a little bit of a plate of, this is what concerns us right now. We'd love to talk to you sometime, and this is who we are and what our plans are for the next few years. So that's it. I like that idea.
You could also throw in, we are aware that there is a little bit sideways.
It's coming from the other side of the aisle.
Anyhow, is there any mileage in writing that kind of letter? Mr. High?
I can't really advise. I mean, there's no harm in it.
No. All right, well, I'll make a motion then.
I don't think it couldn't hurt to at least, and that way maybe she could just go in and show some support for us.
And I'll move that a letter goes from the mayor to our newly elected MLA, Susan Corcoran, advising her that we are investigating the possibility of speed reduction below 50 kilometers an hour, and that we are aware that there may be a private member still in that regard as well.
Okay. Maybe we can get the name of the member who's proposing it. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Feeney was 2 seconds ahead of you again, not even a microsecond. Okay, you've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's see. Is that it with transportation? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, and finally, I'd move that we defer the 2 other items, specifically the request for proposals for engineering services in relation to the intersections of Main Street and Long Hill Road and Main Street and Edgewater to a later date.
Okay, not necessarily, it could be the, is it
Before.
budget or
I guess,
that's only 3 months away?
yes, to the budget process.
Okay, so the budget process. Deputy Mayor, you second it?
No, I'll second it and then we'll have a comment.
Go ahead.
Would you want to have a broader conversation of policy and strategy even before the budget process so that we can have some sort of, because I think it's a question of having agreement as to how far we want to push the envelope before it gets to the budget process.
On the transportation piece?
Yeah. Or a whole conversation about phase 2 of the transportation.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest maybe if you say the agenda item for policy and strategy could just be transportation projects 2022 and onward.
Yeah.
And then council could have a general discussion about that.
Yeah, I think the theme behind that deferral is not to defer it to never. It's just to defer it. I think we're all recognizing we want to have another conversation about next steps in phase 2, and then we'll get to that. So fair enough. So Deputy Mayor, you're thinking that we either have a special meeting or we have another discussion at an appropriate time, sometime in the next 2 months, specifically about transportation as a key item.
We'll vote on the motion to defer and then we'll ask that we put it on the list of things to be reviewed at the policy and strategy committee. Councillor Carver?
I have a question about the motion. Councillor Feeney just referred to the first of the motions that were recommended. And I wonder if it was intended to include the second one as well.
Fair enough. That's an appropriate amendment to cluster them together.
Okay. Clerk?
I have a question for clarification, please. I did actually have the first two motions were deferred. I'm just not sure where we are now. Are we deferring this? Are we referring this to the policy and strategy committee, or is the idea to do that separately? And then this motion is to defer this specifically to a later council meeting. I'm not sure where we are with that.
Well, I think there's a formal recommendation from staff that I think we want to review and discuss. So if we discuss it at the next strategy meeting, then we'll be able to respond at a subsequent council meeting. Does that sound right, Dylan?
Yeah, so I would, to Mo's question, I guess if you're deferring these items down the road, then it doesn't automatically stand that this is on the agenda for policy and strategy. So when this motion passes, you still want to just figure out how it gets on that, either by a motion tonight to refer or on another occasion. So I think it's just a two-step. One is to push this report. The other one is to create the opportunity between now and then. So I think that Mo is.
We've already pushed the report, I think, have we not?
We haven't voted on that.
Okay, so we'll vote on that, I guess.
Okay, so let's vote on deferring the report. All in favor? Okay, now the motion around the planning and strategy committee.
Yes, I'd move a motion that we put transportation on the planning and strategy committee meeting. I'm guessing probably January, not even the next two is probably.
We'll probably following procedure just to add it to the list and then just you guys can talk about it.
Seconder on that one, Councillor Renell.
I think Councilor Burdick had her hand up before me this time.
Okay, all in favor? Motion is carried. We will now pick it up on our agenda at Planning and Strategy Committee. Okay, let's move on to the next item, time tempest fusion. Now, next we have the report of the clerk on the repeal of dangerous and unsightly buildings bylaw.
Thank you, Your Worship. A public hearing was held on October 28th to receive verbal and written submissions regarding the town of Mahone Bay draft bylaw to repeal the town of Mahone Bay dangerous unsightly buildings bylaw. 7 members of the public were in attendance via the town's YouTube channel. There were 0 comments presented to the hearing, 0 submissions were received prior to the hearing, and 2 questions were received at the hearing. The hearing adjourned at 6:47, Your Worship, and now council has before them the draft bylaw for consideration and possible second motion and adoption of bylaw. Second reading, pardon me.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
I move that the bylaw be accepted as presented. Did I word that correctly?
Okay.
Be given the second reading. Old fashioned way to say it. Yeah.
All right, delegates. Okay, so I'm just looking at the 3 motions that were in our package. All right.
That's on the wrong. report.
Is it?
You're on transportation, right?
We've already had first reading.
Yeah.
So this is just the second reading. We've had the public hearing. All right. So there's nothing to repeal, is there?
Well, we're voting to repeal.
So the first reading was previously given, and then we just did the hearing tonight. So a second reading would be the repeal. It would, I know it's backwards, but you give second reading to a bylaw to repeal.
So we can do a little massage work on our motions.
Council Carver's motion was.
Council Carver had it absolutely correct.
That's right. I'll second that, Mayor.
Moved and seconded on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Now we also need another.
I have a question.
Oh,
The 3 motions that you were talking about, the ones that I highlighted in yellow, the one that talks about council delegate to the CAO responsibility to administer. I remember we had a good conversation about it and equity was included in it, but it's not in that book.
So we did actually already pass that with equity included. This is just a staff report that was presented at that time that is still here for your information. But we don't, these motions don't need to be action tonight.
okay. All right. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for picking up on that. Let's, so we're done with that. Good. Phew. Fire Department quarterly report.
Your Worship, Chief Vino is unable to be with us this evening, so his report has been submitted as a written report. If council's had a chance to review, if there are any questions, we can forward them on to Chief Vino to respond.
Okay.
You're busy, 22 calls. I feel like that's a fair bit for.
Okay.
Got a
So-
thank you note in there for the fire helmets that was approved a couple of meetings
And they've
ago.
got 5 new bodies already. Okay, staff, let's go to item 6.6. Staff report on occupational health and safety. Kirk, are you going to?
Your Worship?
Pretty straightforward.
Yes, it is pretty straightforward. Council is aware that staff has been working with to develop a safety program for the town of Mahone Bay. The staff has been working on that. We've developed that in consultation with a consultant and across departments. But what is necessary to allow us to enact that program is a policy at the council level. And also the Occupational Health and Safety Act of Nova Scotia requires that we have an occupational health and safety policy. So
Okay.
council has before them a draft policy for consideration. If council decides this is something they want to continue with, then it will appear on the next meeting of council for consideration.
Councillor Wilson.
Just moves, your worship, that council approve the occupational health and safety policy as presented.
So if I may, again, this is one that our policy requires that any policy come to council for review, and then it would go to the next council meeting for passage.
Okay.
So hold that thought till the next time in order.
No, they're just enthusiastic, and that's appreciated. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, was that the comment you were? Okay, good enough.
And just so everybody knows, that it is our policy that says present it to one meeting and have it go to the next. But that's in order to accommodate the MGA requirement that councillors receive a draft policy a minimum of 7 days before the meeting in which it is passed. And our council package doesn't go out 7 days prior. So what we did was we set it up, oh, it's going to the next meeting. So it's our policy, but it's also basically in legislation.
Okay. Let's talk about electric vehicle chargers.
So I'll just quickly speak to this one. I think we had an update on this a couple of months ago. So council, I'm sure, remembers that these are impending. They've been impending for a while now. But when we got acting on council's direction last time around to reach out to the independent store, I will say the local store has been very enthusiastic about this. But the owner of that property is not the local store. It's a national property ownership, property management company. So, you know, it's not going that quickly as far as approval as, say, the Mahone Bay Center when looking at the draft agreement. So in the meantime, we have the limited amount of time to install the chargers that we got on this cost subsidized program through Enercan. And Martha went around looking at different locations that do belong to the town and had a suggestion as an alternative location. And sorry, it's not highlighted here, it should be, but the council approved the Clearway Main parking spot. So that would be one of the two located just prior to the intersection of Clearway and Main Street. And it's one of few on street, but actually painted and designated parking spaces located next to a power source where everything lines up to be an effective place to be able to put a charger. And then it does also provide coverage for a whole side of town where we weren't anticipating to have a charger. So the closest one to that location would otherwise have been at the fire station and the town hall. So that's the proposal. It wouldn't preclude us from working on the independent store as the location. It just, that may not come through in time for this program.
Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Carter.
I would like to make that motion that council approve the Clearway Main parking spot as an additional alternate charger location.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now? On the motion, question?
So I do have a question about the practice around EV chargers. So if it is approved to have that spot at Clearway and Main designated, does it mean that other gas fueled cars cannot park there or shouldn't park there?
It does mean that they would not be allowed to park there and we would ticket them.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
because it's on town property, you can do that?
Well,
I'm just
yeah,
wondering.
we certainly can do it, but also the efficacy of the charger is pretty quickly eliminated if somebody's parked in front of it.
But correct, well, the reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking that at the LCLC, for example, I'm sure I've seen non-electric cars parked.
I imagine that because of the significant number of chargers that they have and the relatively low number of users, that they're just not enforcing that right now. That they feel that they've still got some EV charger spots that would be available, so they're not really cracking down on it. But
Okay.
they have the right to enforce that.
Okay, I'm gonna ask another question then. If a regular car parks in the EV charger space at the grocery store or at the Mahone Bay Center, can the town ticket them?
Yeah, under the terms of our agreement, we're administering that spot. Now, I mean, in any of these locations, I don't think we'd start off with a monetary ticket. I mean, these are new things. We want to educate people around it.
Councillor now and then Councillor
So
Finn.
will these have signage there saying that EV parking only?
Yes, yeah. And the signage is standard for Berwick, Mahone Bay, and Antigonish anyway. Area designed some signage that we can use.
Councillor Finn.
I'm just wondering about the two spots behind the pharmacy. So we have a blue parking spot now, and then we have the two EV parking spots beside it. And I think there's many times, as we all know, we drive there looking for a parking spot, there are none to be had. So I'm wondering on that particular location about a complete prohibition of, conventional cars versus just a reduced, a limited use. Like if we went from, so right now we would have 3 spots that no one's allowed to park in. And I'd say they're 3 of the most well-used spots in the whole town. If we put the EV charger there, great, like perfect location for the charger. But I'm just wondering over the next 5 years, as the market share grows for that product, are we better off with something like a 15-minute maximum timeline, so that if you have an EV, you're only 10 minutes away from being able to park there because your gas car has to move. But are we really going to block out 2 full parking spots in that location like, are we really going to take those out of the inventory? I guess right now we are, right?
I mean, obviously, the straight answer is this proposal is that we would be, and that was the intention. But again, I don't want to preclude other members of council weighing in on this. Our look at the area was, if you actually look at the amount of parking available in Claremont, and especially if you add in the public parking lot on Pond Street, there is significant public parking for able-bodied individuals in that area. So I know people like to park as close as possible to where they're going. But I don't think there really is that dire of losing these 2 spots would actually cause people not to be able to find a place to park.
Okay, Councillor Burdick was next. Councillor Carver.
But that seems even harder to enforce to me also, is the limited time versus, having it exclusively for EV vehicles. But I can see your point.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah.
Councillor Carver and then Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, well, I was just picking up on the limited time idea. I mean, is it possible that people might just come and park their car there and leave it there for the next 10 hours? Sure.
You mean for an EV user to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's paid by the hour. So like the longer you're there, the more it's going to cost you. That helps people to move along. Because you can just move to the parking spot next to it that doesn't have a charger and park your EV. You can still park your EV anywhere, so then you wouldn't be paying for it. So hopefully people wouldn't just be leaving their car there to sit. From an enforcement perspective, I mean, we know we have, it was already referenced in the previous report, a limited amount of enforcement time. So we're not going to be able to really crack, like unless we significantly increase the resource to bylaw enforcement, we're not really going to be able to do too much to crack down on that.
Deputy Mayor.
So I do understand the issue of, putting the charges, then you want to make sure that you're maximizing the utilization. But there's if we understand the idea that folks who can afford EVs right now are folks who are wealthy. And so the message we're sending out in many ways with that approach is that wealth buys you a parking spot in Mahone Bay.
No, wealth buys you the car. The car
exactly.
VIP treatment.
It's VIP treatment for a particular group of folks, and that's, for me, it's a little bit problematic. I don't have a solution around that. I think maybe the suggested 15-minute period might be, we might not be able to enforce it, but it can be sort of I guess a halfway measure. But
I think what we could do is say that, like, from an enforcement perspective, if there's a vehicle parked there, we'll come back again 15 minutes later and then deal with it.
Yeah.
So people might take their chances, just think they can park there and move. I don't think you could ever put up a sign that tries to say EV parking only except for less than 15 minutes. I think that would be very challenging. But from an enforcement perspective.
I had one question, then Councillor Feeney and Councillor
Sorry.
Now. I realize that depending on how much of a charge was on your car when you left home and how far you drove to get to Mahone Bay, how much juice you've used up and how much more you need to recharge, how long does it take to charge an EV? I mean, I'm hearing it's like 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on the car.
Yeah, I think you're talking anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, depending on the car and the level of battery.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, do you want to comment on the charging?
I do, only because it depends more on the charger.
There are high-speed chargers, but they're
And there are-
$100,000 a piece or
Well,
something.
you can get 15-minute chargers, I know that.
Okay, they're quite expensive, I hear.
I don't know, and I don't know what we bought.
Did people want me to comment on that? I can certainly talk about it. So these are level 2 chargers, level 3 chargers, the fast chargers you guys are talking about. We did price the fast chargers. They're between $80,000 and $120,000 a unit. This program in our can was funding level 2 chargers. So over 100 locations between the various municipal electric utilities were put forward, including Mahone Bay, for level 2 chargers specifically. At the current time, the understanding of the way that people use the infrastructure is that level 2 chargers can tie into the strategy of a downtown. There's not a significant number of level 3 chargers available. Most people who are traveling expect to access a level 2 charger. The amount of time they can spend is usually based on what they can walk to. So the proximity of these locations to downtown attractions, restaurants, etc., is usually what someone's looking for if they're going to park their vehicle for a number of hours. That's kind of the model. Commercial level 3 chargers are starting to become in use in other areas. I'm sure they will come to Nova Scotia. Our discussion at the time, and this is a while back, so it was previous council, was that the Irving station in town would very likely wish to be at the forefront of level 3 charger implementation. And they're on our electric utility, so we would sell them the power and they would use it. So, we would expect that these level 2s would be a backbone here. Level 3 would get going at the Irving as, the province just set a target of 30%, if you guys have heard this, but 30% EV adoption by 2030 is a huge target. If we get there, you'll see all the gas stations having level 3 chargers. And the thought with these level 2s is that they could become, and this may speak to the Deputy Mayor's point about access, the potential backbone to a car share, an electric car share. So we get a couple of cars and say, they're at one of these charger locations. If you want to, as a resident, use a car for a few hours, here's the system. You can sign out one of those cars and take it, to Lunenburg or Bridgewater, whatever. And that's an access that might be there for people who don't even have a car at home. So there is a way to look at that. It's like what happens 10 years from now when we're at a place where level 3 has become commonly available to people. And so that's our thinking. But yes, the notion with level 2 at this time is to be ahead of a curve to support a change that is happening more broadly.
Tesla bought 100,000, or Hertz bought 100,000 Teslas to put in their North American rental fleet. Councillor Carter, you got a comment before Councillor Burdick?
I think I'm done.
Okay. One more question around the charging piece. What was it? It's gone down with Councillor Carter.
Just, you mentioned about the time that we mentioned about maybe somebody parking at 10 hours, that's everything. Well, if it's an EV parking place, what's stopping them from parking there and not plugging in?
So it's true that we would, if we're going around and we see a vehicle there, we probably will want to confirm that it is actually paying and using it, but like the intention of the signage is that you pay for the time that you're there. So, we can even possibly see it charging, go by, mark the tire or whatever, although I'm sure Al will remember the EV, it's not like there's that many of them, and then go back again and, but theoretically that, somebody would probably get away with that if they tried it.
You remember, I remember mine.
Well, actually, I have a new question now, based on Mr. Hyde.
So traffic enforcement, you're always gonna find that. Yeah.
I have this, is this going to be you going out and marking the tires? Or is it going to be the clerk? Or is it going to be the bylaw officer?
So only our bylaw enforcement officer would be doing this enforcement. So that's Al. So yeah, when he's here, he'll be. And I mean, we always say, you all know, I think we have to kind of use targeted enforcement. People know we're out there, they never know quite when. That's about all we can do.
He has random days.
Yeah.
Councillor Feeney.
So we have a time constraint. It's August 31st, December 31st. We're all gonna be
Yeah,
up and running.
they all need to be in, yeah.
Excellent. We'll give it a whirl, see what happens.
Okay.
So did we do all this discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so we still.
Well,
need
that
to-
was on the question, wasn't
And it was all good on the question, I think, but we do need to call it that.
Okay.
So are you in agreement that we will do that time piece or not? I didn't get a sense of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, again, enforcement is tricky. We don't typically direct our bylaw enforcement officer specifically not to enforce any of the rules that are out there. But we always err on the side of education. So like what I can say is that if somebody parks a gas vehicle there in the first, period after they've been installed, we would be taking an educational approach, I think. In the city, you get towed. Most likely, we're not going to be doing that unless it's a repeat offense situation. So that's my answer. If council wants to direct there to be a specific policy, I do believe it would have to be signed. And I think it would be very detrimental to the effective use of the chargers. I wouldn't recommend it, but somebody could move that motion, I guess. If that.
Well, we have a motion on the floor now.
Yeah.
For council to approve the Clearway Main parking spot as an additional alternate EV charger location. Moved and seconded, lengthy discussion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to, staff report on town hall renovation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this has been a while in coming. We're sitting here in the hall, although the public can't really see the difference, but we are now at the end of the renovations of the building. And so this is a summary report provided to kind of run down the project, some of the issues that we encountered. Obviously, there were significant cost overruns in the project and lessons learned. At the end, it does conclude with a recommendation, which was considered by council back in September. And at the time, staff had suggested that it be delayed until we got to a report such as this one that would hopefully answer general questions around the project. So I'll happily take more questions that may arise.
Councillor Feeney.
I just had one question, Dylan, and if we need Luke, it can be deferred, certainly. But just so I have kind of the numbers straight in my mind. So we're all in at 349. That's probably plus HST maybe, but 349 for project costs. And we spent over 58 last year, so we did it with 290 this year. That was sort of my holes back in the napkin based on your correspondence here in the document. So when we say specifically the recommendation to take the money out of the reserve, net of the original 2021 budget, I think we're just dipping in a little. We had the 200 in the core capital program, but we have 290,000 worth of bills, plus the 50 or 60, the 58 we spent last year. So I think when I read that, my first impression was we were dipping into the capital reserve to the tune for the full 290, but I think net of all the moving parts, really it's just the $90,000 of overrun is what's coming out of the original. Like you started with at the beginning of the year, we had 950,000 in the reserve, plus we had a capital program. How much beyond the capital program do we need to be augmented by the reserve? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, you're totally correct in your understanding of that.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say the overrun on the project is only 90 because
Yeah.
when council obviously increased the budget to 200, it was already with almost 60 spent and an understanding that it had previously been a lower budget. So, but the remaining difference is the approximately 90 between budgeted and the impact on the capital reserve that wasn't anticipated in the projected capital reserve balance would be about 90, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Looks good.
Councillor Wilson, I see you've got a motion coming up on the town hall renovation. Would that be an appropriate piece to consider in this discussion, or?
That's your discussion.
It strikes me that if I believe your motion is calling for a detailed review with a report back to council with recommendations. Should we spend the money now and worry about it? I mean, the work is done, the job is done, the bills are due.
Well, first of all, I have absolutely no problem with the value per dollar that we got. I think if we look around, I'm quite comfortable that it was money well spent
Okay.
in retrospect. I had a long preamble to this proposed motion before, and we've since edited it down a bit. And of course, we now have Dylan's report, which I didn't have when I wrote this. I still think that there are significant questions outstanding, and I want to emphasize that my concern is with process and policy, not with people. I don't know whether there's anybody that you could tar and feather for this or not,
Or should.
and I don't really care. But it strikes me that there were some glaring problems, in my opinion, with the original RFP process and with certainly some of the original estimates. When you have an estimate for electrical upgrades at $12,000 and you come in and ask for an additional $44,000 for electrical upgrades, it tells me that whoever did the original estimates for electrical didn't know a hell of a lot about it. So we need to review those kinds of things, and that's what I was hoping to get to with this motion. Now, I will move the motion with everybody's.
Before you move it, just discussing the report itself. So all the renovations finished. Are we done?
Yes.
But there's sections of, for instance, the front side that there's still rot that I can see in the building. So
the facade of the project was not in scope. It is referenced in here that there are other things that are still potentially on the horizon as far as the building. I'll just recap that. It says bottom of, it's not page numbered, bottom of page 3. It says future considerations for the town hall building in the short to medium term include completing transition away from fossil fuels, improving pedestrian access to property, which we talked about recently, and facade renewal along with the location of public works operations from a fact. So facade renewal, we specifically didn't include any exterior components of this project. Now, as a result of some of the unanticipated or under anticipated, I mean, I agree with Councillor Wilson. We had, I think it was 2,000 or 4,000 or something for the water damage to that area, then it amounted to 30,000. That wasn't meant to be exterior. Now it did include some exterior work in the end. So the facade would have to be a discussion for the next year's budget or a future year's budget. But I do acknowledge that facade work probably ought to follow at some point in the near future at council's discretion. And there is exterior funding that is potentially available, beautification, for example. So yes, that is understood. It's a pity to do all this work inside and then not have a real facelift for the outside.
I think for me the larger concerning piece is residents don't normally go through the meetings the same way we do, and so they will pick and choose, right, what's concerning to them. And so somebody will say, well, we spent 350,000 to do renovations, and then somebody will come to pay their taxes and see there's a rotten seal on the window. Like, where did our money go? They won't. This conversation we're having won't show up, and so that's a bit concerning for me in terms of we should have done that. In fact, when we were asking for, I guess, more money, we should have included that because it leaves us So in a precarious situation, sort of from a resident perspective. But yeah,
It's always hard to know where to draw the line with something like that, but, you know, I agree that this council didn't have that discussion. One of the things the report, I think, illustrates is that the scope was an attempt to keep the work as limited as possible, and that approach did not work very well. And one of the consequences of that, I suppose, was that the facade was not included in an effort to keep the work as minimal as possible. And, you know, we see where we are, so.
Councillor Finn.
I do think that council would benefit from a staff report on the next phase of improvements to the town hall. Both, you know, that are critical and things that can be deferred, sort of a more of a multi-year project. You know, year 3, we do the roof, year 2, we do the deputy mayor's rotten cellar. I think those are great ideas. Also, honestly, it's hard for us to justify continuing to have oil heat in this building, if that's the case. So those are, I think, those are all items I think that the council will favorably review in the budget process. We just need the information. But I think just to provide some feedback to the CAO, I do think that there is, I think that the poster talks about civic pride of the municipal building, and I really think these improvements will support that civic pride. Also, we've had many conversations at the HAC about kind of reauthorizing the heritage designation for the building now that we've made the investment, and it appears that from a municipal government perspective, this is going to be our home for, let's call it 20 years. Who knows what the future beyond that will bear. So suddenly some of the rationale for not reviewing the heritage designation that kind of fell out of cadence with the legal work. You know, I think there'd be much more of an open mind to kind of reestablishing that. So I think a staff report on phase 2 sometime between now and the budget deliberations would be time well spent.
Do you want to make that a motion? There's a few motions
Sure.
that have been discussed. I don't mean to put that at the head of but I think it would need to be a motion at some point if you wanted it.
Sure, I'm happy to make that
A
motion.
staff
Yeah.
review of phase 1 in anticipation of phase 2.
Well, I guess what I'm talking about is to go forward. What else? I wasn't as cognizant of the issue that the deputy mayor brought up, but I'm sure there are other things that the engineering and the operations team are aware of.
Absolutely.
It's just how do you bring those to the table for council to be aware of, so that we can have a good conversation about it in budget deliberation about the next basket of work that the staff thinks is important to move forward.
Okay. Councillor Bird.
If that was a motion, I would second it, but also I feel like Kelly had a motion there too. And I did want to pick up in this report, you were very clear about where you think things fell down. And that might be a good thing to consider for the future, is bringing in another management, an external project management for projects of a certain size, and that could be part of the policy, which came up in Councillor Wilson's report also, or motion. So, I mean, I do think that it's happened. we have the renovations here. It's a matter of how do we address future situations where things just sort of get out of hand really quickly. So I would also, I don't know if I can second 2 motions at the same time.
so my assumption was that Kelly's motion is still coming up, right? That's still
Theoretically, the motion in here that was recommended by Luke hasn't been moved or seconded. Kelly has a motion that he hasn't moved or seconded. And I'm not totally sure from the chair if Joseph and Alice have a motion on the floor. Okay.
What we think is a motion.
Okay, so we're in discussion on that one then, maybe.
Clerk?
Can I get clarification on that motion? I just have the council direct staff to prepare a report for council
On on future capital investment in the town hall.
And that would be ahead of the 2022 budget process.
Okay. Councilor Burke,
I'm sorry, I thought that, because we were talking about Councillor Wilson's motion, that it was also, but we'll wait to deal with that after this, I guess.
In the fullness of time.
It could either be while we're on this item, or it could be when it comes up under council items. It just,
So-
Joe had made a motion.
So we have a motion on that one. Are we okay to vote on
your
that?
motion is on the floor right now.
Yes.
Okay, so. Ready?
Yes.
Are you okay? Vote on, all in favor? Okay, so
Yep.
that motion's done.
Specifically, the recommended motion in the package.
Yes.
So I'm a little confused about the description of the recommendation, the recommended motion. Because in my mind, that means that the staff is looking for the ability to draw down the full value of the 2021 investment, which is, as I understand, $259,000 out of the reserve. But I was under the impression that we already had a $200,000 line item, capital item, already in the budget that's approved and authorized. And really what we're only authorizing
Just
is
the difference.
the incremental, is the gap.
The only reason it's written this way is that Luke wanted to be sure that we got the number right. So rather than him putting in a number that was exact and then having us have a $400 discrepancy and coming back and so he's just trying to say whatever the total is that we're at, this is what it is. And that's partially because Luke delivered this September 14th and that we were one step away from completion of the project at that time. So
So if you're.
you can quantify this if you if you want to.
Yeah, I just want to make sure what we're really talking about is we're augmenting the authorized budget by a further $90,000 so that they can pay all the bills.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we're taking the $90,000
already got
out of
200
the reserve.
On the.
So
Ready to pay.
So you could even express it that the town hall renovation project in excess of the budgeted capital reserve allocation be funded, and so it's, you know, just a little
Exactly.
extra,
So
yeah. we could do
I think
that.
that's exactly, Mo, what I'll move. So that the.
So we're upping the existing $200,000.
That's essentially. Right. That's right. I think.
Okay.
I mean, it makes total sense to me, Joe.
I had, so just as we had this, I was in another board meeting a week ago and had this exact situation about what are you really authorizing? Because you have to make it has to have council authorize any withdrawals from the reserve. But we just need to quantify it. So
Yeah,
in this
to know
case,
exactly what we're authorizing to withdraw. And it's 90,000
yes.
plus 94, 97,000.
I think it's actually 90,681, but I don't know if you need to get that prescriptive.
I think you're okay with saying that it
Yes,
is the difference between
Yes.
the 200,000 and
Yes.
the resulting final amount.
Yes.
That's what
Whatever
we're
the
getting
final.
at, yeah.
There's probably a bag of nails we haven't paid for yet.
That's right, that's right. Okay, who was Joseph's seconder on that motion? Deputy Mayor was, okay,
I don't know.
you are now. On the question, all in favor? That money's spent. Now, Councillor Wilson.
Well, we have certainly done sufficient preamble. So I'll just, but I do want to make the motion and council can do with it as it chooses. My motion is that council appoint a small subcommittee to review the entire town hall renovation project from initial proposal to final report, which I said is forthcoming but is now here. This committee to be composed of 3 members, and they shall be appointed by the mayor in consultation with the deputy mayor and the CAO. In particular, the subcommittee shall review all processes and procedures that were involved in the initial proposal, as well as the changes that took place as scopes of work were developed by who and with what direction. Attendant budgets were developed and contractors were chosen. The goal of the review will be to understand where policy or procedure deficiencies or gaps may exist that allow the project to morph from a modest shared cost accessibility project to a, well, bracket, still relatively modest renovation project as approved in Q1 of 2021 to eventually a completely town-funded renovation costing nearly $400,000. This committee shall report to council not later than the last regular council meeting in February 2022 with its recommendations for remedial action, if any.
And the subcommittee would consist of 3 members of council.
Yes.
Right?
Members of council.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor now seconds that.
And now I'd like to make a little comment.
Yes,
Because
please.
when this first came up with the renovations to the town hall, my impression at that time was that we were to make the town hall accessible. But the original RFP that was granted, the first original contract that was granted, didn't even include the accessibility. We had to approve an amendment to that, an addendum to put in the ramp. So, you know, that to me took something went straight somewhere there.
Okay.
Because it wasn't, the original plan was to make it accessible, but it wasn't included in the original scope of work.
Okay. CAO.
So I do have some real concerns about just procedurally the notion of a subcommittee of council being charged with a investigation or that type of a concept. I think it speaks back to a kind of a previous model of governance. My suggestion on this, if I was in a position to make one before the motion, would be that council have a closed session in which outstanding questions that people feel haven't been answered could be discussed around the table before any such subcommittee or anything would be acted on. I think this report that I presented was done with a level of detail appropriate to a public session. And I think people have appropriately kept questions to things that are appropriate for a public session. And I think there was an important accountability element to the community of putting a significant amount of information about the project in a public session. But I think that the most appropriate procedural thing to do would be to have a closed session for that discussion. And from there, if council chose to take the direction to establish a subcommittee, it's irregular, but obviously that's council's prerogative. So I guess it's a request on my part that this motion be deferred until such a time as council has had a closed session discussion where people can freely raise concerns and have a discussion. And if from there, this is a necessary step, obviously council can make that determination. So that's a request on my part. I guess it's a request of Councillor Wilson more than anyone because he made the motion, but it's also a request for people to consider when they're considering the vote on the motion.
Councillor Carver.
But when I first read Councillor Wilson's motion, I just instinctively reacted against it, and I don't think I can really articulate what it was, other than I think something the CAO just captured something. It didn't feel right. I wondered who the 3 members would be, and I thought, well, of course, it would include the CAO in order to have that information. So there was just something about it that didn't sit right with the whole proposal. And particularly since the CAO has provided us with a very detailed report and acknowledgement of the challenges and perhaps not having the wherewithal in place to rise to some of those challenges, which is totally understandable and can be appreciated. So I don't think I would have supported this motion anyway. And I'm just wondering about Mr. Hyde's suggestion of having a closed session. What section of the MGA would that fall under? What would that?
That is a good question, Councillor Carver. While the project is active, these discussions typically are acceptable under contract negotiations. I guess I'd have to give some thought to that. It just my notion is that there are from some members or a member outstanding questions that somebody might want to ask, and I want to be able to address them, and I don't feel that this is the right way to do it, and I think you have some same concerns that I do with the procedure.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Feeney, Deputy Mayor's come up, you go, and then.
So, I think I'd advise that we take the CAO's recommendation, defer the motion until after we've had an opportunity to discuss outstanding items in camera. And I do think that the public and the council has benefited a lot from this detailed report that we didn't have the chance to, we didn't have that before this meeting. So I think now that we've had a chance to let that information soak in, if there are any other questions, and I think really to speak to Councillor Wilson's motion about I think the objective here is to learn what we can learn for the next time, versus kind of relitigate, what happened the last time. So fair enough. So, personally, I would be pleased if we defer the motion and we did have an in-camera discussion on it at a later date.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
So I understand what the CAO is saying, and I think that's a good step. But the conversation won't address, I guess, the one thing about lessons learned, and I think as council we need to put a lens of finding how do we have good lessons learned from this, so that, because I don't think a conversation will materialize to, I guess, ensuring that this doesn't happen again, because I've sort of seen in the course of the 1 year, we've rushed to make some decisions at certain points, and we've had to come back and sort of do the same thing that happened with this project. And so some kind of introspection, whether it's formalized in this particular way, we need to find a way in which you can say, well, these are the lessons we've learned from these renovations, and this is, I guess, the remedies. It doesn't have to be, from my perspective, it doesn't have to be a subcommittee, but we need to find a mechanism that we can be able to do that without thinking about, I guess, who's going to take the fall or any that kind of stuff. I think we understand the challenges that are there, but we need to draw out those lessons. We need to find a way to draw them out. Otherwise, it will be an ongoing cycle for us in many ways. Yeah, and then I think I can in some of the cases I can see that the challenges that were there can be addressed by even coming back and the CEO asking, well, for that to happen in a good way, you need to give me more stuff. And so we as the council will come back and say, well, if we don't want that problem to happen, then we need to invest in ensuring that we have the right people and equipment. So maybe we start with that conversation, but CEO on your part have some ideas as to how we can do this and conduct sort of a review that will be helpful for us to learn. And in many ways, have an institution that's learning from its past mistakes and be able to move from that in some ways.
CAO.
I certainly agree with that. I mean, a lot of this report was about lessons learned, and on page 3, there's a section about capacity, and it talks about how we are working behind the scenes to build that capacity in engineering and procurement, project management, partially through working with the other units in the county. So, we might end up with a protocol around how we develop the scope of an RFP utilizing Chester's in-house engineering department, for example, which we've been really hoping to get some more engineers hired for a little while. So I think, I have some suggestions there about what we are doing. MJSB is talking about procurement. I think there could be a real boon in terms of some shared procurement expertise around. I mean, if you look at the way the fire station project's been managed by having a project management company that specializes in that area, I mean, they push back on and are real careful about the terminology around some of these scope creep issues that happen. But it's very difficult to intercept that midway through when the RFP was written without that in mind. So having that understanding going in requires procurement expertise that we don't have in-house. So, I agree, these are the lessons that we need to discuss, and it's just a question of how we could have that discussion. Maybe that's, I mean, don't want to put another thing on policy and strategy committee, but like, maybe that's even another discussion there, is more broadly speaking, what are the lessons from this towards management of major capital projects, and especially managing the contracting process. I'd love to talk more about that. I like your willingness to acknowledge that staff capacity has always been kept low, and part of the cost of that is sometimes when it comes to the way we approach some of these projects, and it's not a cost saver. It's not necessarily a cost saver to keep the capacity low and then spend more on a project as a result.
Councillor Burley.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I think the deputy mayor and the CAO, it just seems like the general sense is that this is something that needs to be talked about more and codified a little bit more. And that was going to be my suggestion, was that it maybe be brought again to the policy and strategy committee to see if this idea of having either the shared procurement services or just a general sense that a project is a certain size, we're going to use an external service to manage it. Then there's some way of addressing this for the future, essentially, where we're like, well, this is what we do in this sort of situation.
Councillor Ron and Councillor Carver.
Yeah, I agree with what's being said. I think the main thing behind what we have to learn from this is the lessons. And let's, any project we go to before, next time, let's not get in a situation where we've gotten so far into the project that regardless of what costs come up, that we're bound to it. Let's do a process whereby we know what we're getting into up front. So if it's going to be a $300,000 project, let us know that up front so that we don't end up with all these additions. So that, we start off, and I think what Dylan is saying has some merit, that we need to look into it further, and maybe we need to get involved with procurement and with engineering and stuff like that. So we don't run into this situation again, because this project started off reasonable and all of a sudden got carried away. And it wasn't due to anybody's fault. It was just a procedural thing that we ran into, and we have to work towards eliminating that possibility for any other projects we get into.
Thank you. Any other comments? Deputy Mayor?
No, I think pretty much.
Councillor Wilson was.
Councillor.
That's the
Okay. Yes, it was Councillor Carver. Yeah, you go.
I don't know if this is even possible. I would like to ask Councillor Wilson to withdraw his motion, but I don't know if that's even procedurally proper. I think it goes in a dangerous direction, which I'm very uncomfortable with. I'm certainly going to vote against it if it is not withdrawn, and I would encourage others around the table to vote against it as well. And it would be far preferable procedurally, I think, to refer this to Policy and Strategy Committee rather than an in-camera meeting for which we don't know what kind of category it would fall into. Because I think the CAO has provided us with the groundwork for the discussion. I mean, this project, how different is it from any other renovation project that any of us have ever gotten into, where one thing leads to another, to another, to another, to another. I know the difference is that we're working with public money, but as Councillor Wilson said earlier, this is a good product that we have. So I'm not particularly interested in sweating over what might have been done better or to go into this kind of process. I am interested in having the discussion of what we need to do to know in order to beef up our capacity as needed. And I think the Policy and Strategy committee is the place to do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor, Deputy Mayor?
Well, I'm just curious as to Councillor Wilson's, I guess, place now, based on the dialogue we've had, where you're at.
Where I'm at is, I agree with the CAO, first of all, that a full airing of the issues around this is probably only possible in camera, because there are probably some issues that are, I don't say it would be embarrassing to anybody in this room, but there may be difficulties that we wouldn't necessarily want to be made public. I am prepared with the agreement of my second to withdraw the motion, partly because I don't want to create a giant conflict over this. I would like to point out one thing though, and that is that I think we got full value for our dollar. And I don't think capacity has anything to do with this. I doubt that if we had a project manager, he would have saved $100 on the overall project. He just would charge us $25,000 to do it. So I think we're making a mistake if we hang our hat on the human capacity issue. I think some mistakes were made in the process of developing this project. Who made them, and why they're made, and what the timing was is what I don't understand, and I would like to understand better. But if that's going to cause a great deal of angst in council, then I am prepared to withdraw.
Okay, what about the second?
I agree.
Thank you. That motion is withdrawn.
Yep.
And Deputy Mayor?
I'm sort of wondering if we need to move a motion to have that in-camera conversation. Because I think it's important for us to have that.
Yeah, I
Even
think-
if we're going to go to policy and strategy, let's have the in-camera conversation so that the issues that are not supposed to be public, will be contractual issues, can be discussed there, and then we can move to policy and strategy.
So thinking about the probably appropriate way that could be handled, if there was a motion to hold a special meeting of council to further discuss the subject of the town hall renovation project, it would give staff the opportunity to contemplate what discussion could appropriately take place in open session at that meeting, and to be able to understand better around the table what some of the things that need to be kept confidential are and why, and then I could put out the agenda accordingly with a closed session grounds included, but the motion wouldn't have to say the closed session be scheduled. The motion could just say the special meeting be scheduled, and then we'll look into the appropriateness of the closed session discussion depending on the subject that we're considering.
And any intention to go into closed session will be in accordance with the municipal government.
And that's why I would like to have a little time to consider where we could draw that line. I don't think all discussion has to happen in
No.
closed session, but there are some things that I feel
Okay.
probably ought to.
So I'd like to move that we hold a special session of council to
Council.
discuss the building renovation.
Okay. And you're going to second it?
I'm second.
You are, that's good, okay. So we have a motion to have a special session of council to discuss the renovation project on Town Hall. And the CAO, in preparing the agenda, will identify any, if there are, portions of the situation that should be done in camera in accordance with a particular section of the Municipal Government Act, paragraph 22, sections A through H. On the question, Councillor Carver.
Well, I was going to say that I can't support the motion without knowing what section of the MGA would permit it. But if the clerk could capture everything that you just said, that as to make it part of the motion. I really can't support the motion without knowing what section of the MGA permitted.
Okay, the clerk actually was first, Deputy Mayor, if you don't mind.
I think we're gonna say the same thing, that the motion was that the issue of town hall renovation be referred to a special meeting of council. And then
That's the entirety of the
that's the
motion.
entire
A
motion, yeah.
special meeting of council, not specifying closed.
And I'll look into the grounds that.
Thank you for that clarification.
And most meetings that we do have with an in-camera session, we don't know till we get the agenda precisely which part of the MGA is involved.
And sometimes a meeting will take place in open session and then go into closed session as needed.
For
And it's much easier to do in a special meeting environment than it would be in a general meeting of council, because we're not going back and forth on the video and all of those considerations.
All right, you've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. You'll advise us, do a doodle poll. If you like those. Okay. You want to take it's 20 to 10.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, we're
haven't
taking a break.
had a break and we're.
You want to take a break? We should have done one at 9 o'clock.
Should we finish the public agenda? We're pretty close to the end of it, and where people could then leave us and call it a night if they're watching. And we can move into the.
So
Okay,
don't forget item 7.2.
See, we have 7.1 and 7.2, and then the committee reports, but they're just, there's not a lot of.
7.1, 7.2.
Right.
okay. Committee application, clerk, we have, I don't have that right in front of me right now, but we had an application from an individual who's interested in both the Asset Management Committee and
Police advisory.
Peace Advisory Board, that's right. You have your applications in front of you? Michael Zyuk is the gentleman.
So on the provincial side, do we need a PAB member? Or do we need a PAB appointee through the province? Just for
We
clarification.
need both,
Okay.
and this application has been submitted as for a community representative. And for anyone looking for the application that was received, it's attached to your calendar invitation.
So sorry about for clarity, this person doesn't want to be the provincial appointee?
That's correct. This person is applying to be a community representative.
We do have a citizen who has applied to the province for the provincial appointee position, but hasn't yet heard back from the province.
So that's, I want to encourage people to do it, but if
Yeah,
somebody
well, we've
else.
got one, and a good candidate, I think, but the province, I think it was suggested that they're kind of dragging their feet on those kinds of activities right now with the change in government. So we do have this one individual who's interested. I think he's actually ticked both boxes. I'm not sure if we want to have the same person.
There wasn't a whole lot on his application, you know.
No, there was not.
He didn't say why he wanted to be or in.
I think he talks about clerk, he talks about wanting to serve the town that he's chosen to live in. He's retired military, 30-something years.
I move that we appoint David Lesiak as one of the community members for the Police Advisory Board.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councilor now seconds. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Do we want to allow the second position continue to search for a home? Okay, we'll let it go. Good. Thank you. You'll be a good addition to the Police Advisory Board. We've had a lot of discussions about traffic pieces in particular. Okay, let's go down to the vaccination policy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Let me just do the preamble for the benefit of anybody who might be listening in. As we all know, COVID-19 has caused severe disruption to businesses and other enterprises across the world for the last 20 months or so. It is now, as many have pointed out, a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Businesses and governments across Canada and much of the world have responded to this health and safety challenge by issuing vaccination requirements mandates for their staff. Accordingly, in the interest of ensuring a safe working environment for all employees of the town of Mahone Bay, and also a safe environment for our customers / taxpayers, I would like to propose the following motion. That council direct staff to prepare a draft COVID-19 vaccination policy requiring full immunization of all town employees, including councillors, to be presented to council no later than November 25th, 2021. Council meeting and implemented no later than January 31st, 2022.
Okay,
I'm seconding the motion.
thank you. Moved and seconded on the question.
So you can amend something that requiring full immunization of all town employees that can be immunized, because there's some folks who probably cannot be immunized for various reasons.
Yeah, and that's my original motion was not this one, and this has been amended, so staff can write it up with a full legal blah, blah, blah that was required.
I think now with organizations that require vaccination, unless they provide a bona fide medical certificate that states that they, for whatever reason,
Not don't want to, but can't.
can't take the vaccination.
And in some cases on that type of thing, they require them to have a COVID test.
Frequent
Yeah,
COVID test, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, not to go too far off the deep end, but some of our fellow municipalities, not only have they taken that step, but when there are staff social functions, for example, the Christmas party, those are construed under legislation as being recreational, meaning proof of vaccination is required. So staff would be excluded potentially from that. So there's so many different scenarios to consider, obviously.
What do you do with the staff member who refuses to be vaccinated? Are we gonna tell them to stay home?
You almost have to.
That's what our draft policy will have to get into.
Yeah.
This is motion passes.
Without pay or with pay? I mean, those are the kinds of
Yeah.
things that they're struggling with.
So I'm just encouraging us to focus on the motion, which was simply about developing a policy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm ready to vote.
We're saying employees, that include members of the fire department, because we are considered employees.
My expectation is it will, but obviously that's the kind of thing the policy would have to get into, yeah.
Yeah.
My
I
expectation
would
is
expect the
it
same
would
way.
extend.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Off we go. All right, it's committee reports. I didn't see any requirement for a motion in any of those reports. Does anyone have a question on the Heritage Advisory Committee? Asset Management Committee? Or the South Shore Housing Action Coalition? The draft minutes of that group.
I would move that these reports be received.
I'll wait till he gets a second here. I just have a little question about the housing.
Housing Coalition?
But, okay, so we're in discussion on the motion now? Okay. I just,
She seconded.
as far as the, we recently had a policy and strategy committee where we were talking about appointments to different bodies, external and internal, and as far as that housing goes, so do we, like this is a committee obviously where the town has had a lot of interest in it looks, although it doesn't list last names, like we have 2 members on this committee at this point. So, you know, when we talk about how we tackle the town, is there an appropriateness to add, or housing in the town, is it appropriate to ask either the members of the committee, how this committee is supposed to relate to that, or, you know, has there been a discussion about, we've been talking a lot about how do we approach this issue? And I'm just kind of, I guess we have 3 members, right? I didn't even notice it. I'm assuming you're the Alice, there's a lot of Alice's in Limerick County, but so is this committee going to play a role? I just wondered if maybe we shouldn't be talking about it here, but we have a lot of council members on this committee. It's not making recommendations to the town generally.
Yes,
So
please.
just one clarification I need to make. I am part of SHAC, Social Housing Coalition, in my employed role with the health authority. So I don't represent the town of Bombay. So I think that needs to be clear, because I might represent a conflict of interest if my employer hears that I represent the town of Bombay. But I think Alice is the town representative.
Yes.
So I'll let you speak to Shaq.
Yes, so it's meeting bi-monthly. There is a municipal working group that has been meeting intermittently, we'll say, since last year. I can see how these things do intersect. There have been presentations, there has been discussion, and then various sort of waiting. I think a similar thing that's been happening here has been happening there. The sense of like waiting to see what was happening provincially. I feel, but I do know that there's an interest in tying municipal issues, connecting the dots essentially. I can see how they fit together, certainly. And I don't think we're overrepresented there by far. I mean, Penny, you're an alternate, I believe, or
I'm an alternate because I was attached to Shaq and I didn't continue attending.
yeah.
It's a really good question about the relationship between our representation there and what do we bring back to council and how do the issues intersect. I think it's very subtle how it all works. We take things to Shaq that are specifically representing municipal issues, and I think that that's valued at Shaq. I'm not so sure that we're bringing back that value to council
From Shaq.
Yeah, and maybe we should be thinking more about that. And I think one thing that is going to be helpful is the fact that we have split the meetings so that every second month it's the whole group, and on the alternate months it's special interest groups. So we now have the elected representatives in that group. So it's a much more specific discussion, and that's where the issue of the study came up, initiated by Bridgewater. And then the decision to really hold off until we had the census information. So there was that kind of conversation. So I think this smaller group with the municipalities, the municipal reps will be more focused.
It's an interesting question because a lot of the focus from the beginning has been on the idea of collaborating municipally. But I see that as a hugely valuable thing because of the shared, situations in terms of funding specifically. But I do see more and more the value in us maybe having a specific, don't know what to call it, task force or working group here as part of council, maybe as part of the attendant to the discussion that we had in a previous meeting, the policy and strategy committee meeting actually, which was about how to organize committees. And that way, very specific discussions on, actively planning in the town could be had. Actively seeking out, I mean, I know you seek funding where it can be for these things, but having things go beyond the purview of which developers approach us and have a more sort of forward thinking housing strategy. So I think it's a hugely invaluable coalition, but it's sort of attendant to also what we could be doing here.
As part of the little changes that have happened, SHAC was and continues in many ways is a public health led and I guess steered conversation. But we know public health has been held up with COVID and things like that. So as part of just that flux, have been asked to take, I guess, a larger role, planning and supporting what they do. And I think as an elected group, one of the ideas is to have a very focused discussion at the next meeting around what thoughts and plans individually folks have, and also what they bring from their individual units. The sense, I don't want to preclude that conversation, but the sense for me that brings is sort of, rather than thinking about housing from a individual unit kind of perspective, there might be opportunity there to think about it from a regional perspective. And introducing the lens that the new PC government has brought up, and they're talking about having a provincial strategic plan on affordable housing, and how do all these regions fit together. So I think we might have some of those conversations to figure out some new things that might come out of that conversation that maybe Penny and Alice can bring to the table that might inform, if we're going to do a housing strategy here, how are we moving forward? So when I think about, we'll put aside some funding as a town of Bridgewater that has some, I think they had said 25,000 something like that for needs assessment, which the province is supposed to fund. Actually, they say they will through the Housing Commission report. So if that's funded there, and they have some pocket of money, and we have some, and maybe Model and Town of Nuremberg kind of whale some, then maybe there might be some way we can think about it differently, the project differently. But I don't want to preclude those conversations because they need to be hard and fast. And then hopefully, if the brains at the table, the folks who are interested in housing, they might come up with a good way forward.
Well, thank you. I know I'm kind of putting you guys on the spot. It's late at night, but you think about anything from Citizens for Public Transit at one end to the Lunenburg County Accessibility Advisory Committee at the other, and where Shack fits in on that. Is it an outside entity lobbying us, or is it us working together at a regional level, or so stuff to think about anyway. And I certainly don't mean that. I've been very supportive of Shack. I've been to their meetings in the past, and I was staff had a direct role on the housing coalition in Shelburne and Digby. So I, certainly very familiar and supportive, but I just want us to be thinking about that. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you. So Councillor, now you had made a motion to accept the reports. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Carter? Okay. On the motion, all in favor? Motion is carried. Do we still have anyone online?
We do, your worship. We still have 10 people watching online, but we have no questions.
Okay. Hearing none. And we've reached the end of our open agenda. We'll entertain a motion to go in camera. So moved, seconded by the deputy mayor. All in favor? Motion's carried. We'll take 5 minutes for the clerk to disconnect us, and we will